And we are live. This is Dark Journalist. It's fantastic to be here with everyone. Of course, I'm joined by the lovely Olivia.
Hi, everybody.
And our special guest, Miss Gigi Young. Gigi, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you for having me back.
Fantastic. It's great to see you. And our special guest. Oh, there I am. It's me in stereo. How have you been?
Good. Been great. Been holding up. It's pretty chaotic out there, but you know.
We've been in a political meltdown season.
Yes.
And it's been people throwing each other around. It's been some of the best wrestling that you could hope to watch. Wrestling, boxing, kickboxing.
Oh, it's been, you know what, but it's perfect time to talk about spirituality and, you know, what does this mean?
Yes.
You know, what's the higher perspective of what's going on? How can we make it through this? You know, what spiritual things can we lean on? How can we understand this from that higher perspective? It's so perfect. So
there's no question. This is an interesting thing about you as well, which is people always expect that you can handle spiritual psychic matters, but you actually bring it into the political aspect. You know how to reflect in those sections and bring out the kind of, you know, spiritual dysfunction that's going on in that as well, which I find really interesting.
I try. I definitely try. And I think that that's what's missing in society is people just trying to bring spirituality into it, not religion, not dogmatic thoughts, but I think that's what's missing from our society is this backbone of spirituality and this backbone which would lead to ethics, you know, which would eliminate a lot of we're kind of missing that. And so I try to, and I think if we all kind of try to, we'd be in a much better position after that.
There's no question. There's no question. It's also very interesting that there are kind of like, you know, there's that idea of things under a spell, you know, as if the land is under a spell. And as we get into these things tonight, there is this feeling that there's an occult nature around every corner of what we're seeing on the kind of glib surface of these weird things happening.
Yes, I have been, I mean, I did a series called In Plain Sight, where I sort of described occult ritual and you know, at the time, the occult little in plain sight things were kind of going very slowly in society.
Right.
And then now it's just like another, I mean, I just saw like a SpaceX launch where like Katy Perry was like sitting on a moon and like the space launch is going on and like just, you know, I mean, it's every day. There is just so much stuff that you can look at with an esoteric eye and you can start linking to different things. I mean, it's a very occult time, what we're in right now, which makes a lot of sense because we're also in this very hypnotic time where we're being confronted with so much opposing information. Wear a mask, don't wear a mask. You know, it can be spread, you know, COVID can be spread through contact surfaces. It can't be. And it's creating this incredible hypnosis in the public. And it's creating this ability to kind of check out or this desire to just check out. And then there's so it's like a hypnotic state, a trance, as you say.
Right.
And then we're being fed all of this occult stuff, all this occult ritual. And it's perfect. And if you look at it like that, it is a large scale occult ritual. It absolutely is. We've got the trance through confusion. And then we've got all these different occult events and symbols. So yeah.
There's no question about it. It's uncanny, actually. Sometimes, you know, it gallivants in public. I remember they were doing this thing about the Satanic Church. I was reading a mainstream article in Bloomberg about it. And what they said when they opened up about it was, the Satanic Church is a church that seeks to improve people's lives. And blah, blah, blah. And they had like a little press release thing for the Satanic Church. And I thought, that's interesting. I mean, yeah, you know, be fair, sure, but this was odd. This was like a little PR commercial.
Like,
yeah.
Please elaborate. Like, I mean, can you get specific on how it improves our life? You know, but yeah, no, I feel like we're at this time in 2020 where everything has to be revealed, and you can't hide it. You got to make your move. You got to show your hand. And the cards can fall where they may. And part of that is revealing this very deep ancient belief system.
Right.
that has been very deeply ingrained in our society. It's an underpinning of society, of the world, that so many people have been sleeping on. And, you know, you see things about like the Satanic Church coming forward. And of course, there's different levels of even that church, where there's a harmless level to it. And then there's, you know, another level to it, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, even within that institution, I mean, we're not necessarily.
No, and I don't like to scapegoat anybody's belief system. It's not that. It's just the oddity of the occult references. Like, you know, you can go back 5 years and you wouldn't have had this kind of flood of things. And it's a normalization of it, which I think that there must be something in the kind of occult spell which says you have to drop the mask at a certain point if you want to accomplish, you know, because there's certainly, you know, they go through a serious period of being completely underground on the occult side. There's little rumors here and there. And then it starts to come out and people start to become aware of it. And now it's like full blown, you know, it's kind of like an occult sideshow. And
That's a good word. Yeah.
So you were doing something really interesting on Twitter. Of course, you're Mystic in the Moon on Twitter.
Yeah.
And you do all kinds of fascinating things for your viewers in there, along with your YouTube channel and the video series. But what's interesting there, and people who watch the X series here are very familiar with your video shows, and they tell me about them often. And they're fantastic. That's a great video series that you have going on in plain sight, which goes right into these occult subjects. But in that Twitter thread, Gigi, what you were doing was you were pulling in thoughts about initiation in relation to space, and that gave me the idea for this episode. And you started to pinpoint different things like Mars being brought into the conversation. You know, Elon Musk tweeting out, "Let's nuke Mars," which is kind of a weird thing to do. And then becoming the 5th richest man in the world as a result. What is going on there, and what were you trying to open up in the conversation?
Yeah, so we are really on a phase in society where we're coming into our cosmic consciousness, which is really like this expanded psychic awareness. And it seems like that also literalizes in society where we become cosmic again. We go to the Mars, we go to the moon, and suddenly the Space Force appears. That's because our consciousness is suddenly expanding as well, and we're opening that psychic ability, and so we seek to mirror that in the world. The thing is that not everyone connects to the cosmos the same, and there are different portals or pathways that you can use psychically. They're not all the same. Everyone thinks that if you're a psychic, you're just tuning into the same place. You're just popping beyond the veil and you're tuning into the same place. Every psychic works with the other side. It's not the case. There are different paths of initiation, and there are different planetary spheres that align to create these paths of initiation. And we know those as stargates. Those are and it's usually a trinity of planets or stars that create this, but it creates a suction for your consciousness. And this is all what psychic ability is really about when you get into it. It's about how to arrange these constellation, these stars, these planets within your being, so you can go certain places and you can get certain knowledge. And I go really deeply into this in my Isis Rising series and my Star Body episode and in that series. But just to kind of fast track us a little bit, Mars is an integral sphere because it represents what I would call the regressive part of humanity. Mars, the moon, and Saturn have this tendency to materialize, to overly materialize, or to gather up and contain I would say, the ego of man at different levels and different times. So it's kind of like this this force that you can align with. And I believe that Steiner refers to it or calls it, I'm just guessing here, but that's what he's referring to as the 8th sphere, is the distinct layer of consciousness that has a specific density, a specific vibrational pattern and density, specific place in the lower astral, that is called the eighth sphere, that exists here at a certain frequency. And that frequency is being held by Mars on one in the middle, and Moon and Saturn on the other side, because they've been absorbing a certain egoic part of mankind that needs to be transcended to get into the higher aspect. So when you were saying Gurdjieff says that, we're food for the moon.
Yes.
Well, I believe he's referring to this chain of spheres that creates that suction, which is the eighth sphere. And our initiation is to overcome that, overcome our ego, and to rise into the higher planetary spheres, the higher spheres. Since we're doing Steiner tonight, that's New Jupiter,
Right.
going into that sphere. And so when we hear about Elon Musk going to Mars, that's about wanting to solidify that chain here, lock that chain here. And to many people, they just think, Mars, how cool. But it depends on the consciousness in which Mars is activated. Depends on the consciousness in which we communicate with Mars. And that activates a certain aspect of Mars within ourselves. And if we don't have that correct, that's locking us into the eighth sphere. That's locking us into a lower planetary chain. And that's not what we want. And that goes into transhumanism, and that goes into the Ahrimanic, or what Ahriman really embodies.
Next point. Here. Hold on. Miss Olivia, in feedback here or not?
Any questions? That's a lot, I know, guys. Sorry.
No, I think whenever I hear myself go back and forth, it's that kind of rhythm. Here's the interesting thing about this, which is absolutely fascinating. What is it then that Mars represents for them?
Oh, it is the future. It is their the destiny. On a higher level, if you're looking at it from a place where you've transcended Mars, where you're into the higher echelon of Mars, you're not trapped in that lower aspect. You would see it as that is people who are connecting to the shadow level of Mars, that the humanity that died there, that never made it through the cycle. And so they desire to go back, and they want to go back. They want to do it again. They want to make it right. They don't realize that how you make it right is through transcending it, rather than just going deeper and deeper into density. And
We've already had Mars dominate.
We've already had Mars dominate, and Mars is a kind of materializing force. It came in after a Venusian sphere, which everything went crazy, and it was so emotional, and it was kind of a matriarchy, and everybody was just doing everything on feeling, and then Mars came in as a clarifying and sobering force. And Steiner talks about this in his work as well. He says, Mars was a clarifying force for humanity. It was not a negative thing, but like any sphere, any cycle, it has its rise and its fall. And if you cling to a cycle when it's dead, when it's already gone through its rise and a fall, you're no longer even really within that. You're doing something completely different. And that's why the eighth sphere is artificial, is it's outside of the incarnational plane. And that's why it's almost like the ghosts of Saturn, the ghost of Mars, kind of that ghost of the shadowy part of the moon. And but they desire to go back because they didn't do it. And so now they're going to do it, but they don't realize, like, this is the next cycle, and it's time to go higher and to transcend that, not become obsessed with it and go even deeper.
So they're playing with a space cosmology and the occult overlay of this period, and now they're trying to physicalize it by physically I think that they're planning on packing up and going to Mars.
Yeah, I think they're there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if they're not there, I think that they're absolutely feeling like, you know, that is ultimately where humanity should be. And the other thing about when a cycle ends, even like the Saturn cycle, is that some of the portals that were open during that time, if you do the rituals, the old school rituals, they'll no longer work in the way that they used to. What will actually happen is that dark entities or dark beings will move in because they're now outside of time. Consciousness has moved on. There's a new cosmology. There's new rituals are adapted, a new avatar, evolved avatar comes. And if you try to do the old way and you get stuck in the old way, what happens is dark beings that mimic light beings will move into those portals. And so that's why I have to be very careful with using old cosmologies and getting too stuck in those old ways, and being in the fire of the now and the presence of your spirit and being rewritten in the now. Because when you get too caught up in those older spheres, what ends up happening is you degrade very quickly because the portals they're not the same as they used to be.
Right. Oh, this is interesting. The original owner has moved on. Yes. And we have these other people who are kind of squatting in the house. And
yeah, exactly. And they're even moving on to an even more transcendent state, like this better, greater state. And so
this is very interesting. Mars is traditionally associated with war, if we go Greek mythology, for example. And Cairo is named after Mars. Actually, that's what the word means for the Egyptians. So when we look at it that way, we've got a big early swing through occultism in Cairo and the love of everything Egyptian. And this is interesting because all the mystery schools follow this Egyptian track, whether you're talking about Cayce's work or Steiner. But also, so we have right-hand mystery schools like Anthroposophy that would do that. But the left-hand mystery schools, like the Crowley-ish schools, they also worship Horus and, the Aeon of Horus and this whole era. And, they have these big revelations coming directly, in the case of Crowley, directly happened in the Giza Pyramid with this revelation that he had. So we're dealing there again with this two different ways to deal with this ancient knowledge. You can get in and plug into that Mars one. And when you bring that around, and we're going to talk about Crowley's influence on the space program, but when you bring that around to 2020 and you see Elon Musk in love with Mars and you hear the Space Force talking about going to Mars, by the way, we've been completely out of action for 50 years in the space program, 48 to be exact. We haven't had a man on the moon since 72. It's quite odd to just stop for 48 years. But what is this? Give us, Gigi, the Egyptian part and how it can be used for right-hand schools or left-hand schools.
Yeah, Egypt is really special I think in the sense of the esoteric and the mysteries there, because it's sort of the last vestige we have of the Atlantean magic that we can comprehend. And even the vast majority of the Egyptian esoterica, we actually can't really we can't really comprehend it because you have to be in a different state of consciousness, grounded to get it. But it's special because it is the last vestige of that world. And so in that sense, it contains that pure essence of cosmic patterns. But the thing is that your psychic ability will always lead you to experience what you are.
Right.
So if you are, not built up, you're not prepared, if you're not really getting your initiations with your soul correct, and then you go and you get exposed to that, you're not going to get this objective knowledge about how the world works. You're going to get an exact reflection of what your inner cosmology is. You're going to connect in with past lives that are the most resonant to where you are now and who you are now. And you're going to get wisdom that is resonant with who you are now and where you are now, your specific vibration. And so even though people can use the same symbols and talk about Horus or talk about Isis or talk about Wedget or talk about the eye or talk about those things, it doesn't mean they understand them, because those things are keys to unlock an aspect within you. Those keys are initiation points of humanity, and just talking about them does not mean that you understand them. It's really what they bring out in you, and that's the slippery part of the mystery. That's the slippery part, is where we approach it with this materialist mindset, like we're gonna come across the ultimate truth. And that's not how the higher dimensions work, you know. And when you get into the higher dimensions and higher densities, there's like 3 things that are merged in one, and that's an object. But our consciousness will perceive it as 3, or so it's such a different state that when we materialize it, we definitely don't know what it is.
Well, don't you know, Gigi, that SpaceX can just put your consciousness in a little jar and drop it off on different planets?
I heard that. I heard that they're in that racket.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. It's quite fascinating, though. You're absolutely right. When they think of things so literally. And when we get into dealing with things from a mystical point of view, you're dealing with a consciousness level, and you can't fake on the consciousness level. You can use your will for, good or evil, but you can't, fake yourself out, and you can't fake other people out when it gets into that spiritual consciousness side. So this is fascinating. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist program. We are on X Series episode 95 with Gigi Young, and we're going to be taking your questions in the second half of the program. We're going to be going deep on initiation here tonight. And Miss Olivia will be putting the questions together. How's it going?
I already have a long list.
That was fast. Amazing. Ask them all in caps. It's easier to track them. And I also want to remind people to go and check out Gigi's videos. Well, she's at gigiyoung.com, but also her video series is on YouTube. And it is fascinating, let me tell you. Gigi, like I said, you were going into this initiation side, and I started to go into Anthroposophy and Steiner's take on initiation, some of the fundamentals there. And it's interesting because there's a lot of things in his work that clarify so many of the different spiritual movements and things that come up. So you can really separate them into fads versus what you can really use, including personalities and people too, I feel. But there's a couple of different quotes. You've got one and I've got one. So I'm going to have you read yours first, and then we're going to jump into Steiner's take on these deeper initiations. And this gets into the cosmology of space and space rituals as well. So go ahead.
All right. Okay. So the knowledge and power which are conferred upon a man through initiation could not be obtained in any other manner excepting in some far distant future, after many incarnations, on quite another road, and in quite another form. He who is initiated today experiences something which he would otherwise have to experience at a much later period and under quite different circumstances.
Right. There's a lot of interesting things in there, but what are you getting from that?
That its initiation is the joining of things, the joining of minds, the joining for things for a time, and then there is an energy that's conferred or that's exchanged, and then it allows the individual to raise within their consciousness and had that initiation not occurred, had you not been exposed to that energy at that time in that manner, you would not have experienced it unless it was in, you had to wait until nature did it perhaps for you, which
Right.
may be a very different scenario and maybe perhaps a lot more difficult.
Right. So it's sort of like the focusing of your being to heighten your own evolution and therefore your spiritual evolution with everything that you deal with around you. It's interesting to me because, a lot of people assume, oh, you're in an initiation, you have to kind of swear by a certain set of rule books, like you're joining the Masons or something, and then that's it. You're under these rules for the rest of your life. But it's a little bit different in Steiner's system. He's saying basically you open up by sort of pledging yourself and you're initiated into that tradition. But then there are various initiations as you move along the levels. And when you get to a certain level, it's all your own decision. You're no longer compelled by anything. It's your, choice. And that's the whole thing about developing your will in the first place. So a lot of this comes down to the will again, Gigi.
Oh, it's always about the will, because the will is who you truly are. Where you choose to use your will or not use your will defines who you are and defines what you make of your life and everything about it. And I think you were highlighting the difference there between an oath and an initiation. Initiation is a very, very spiritual thing. And at least my memories from Atlantis and previous times, all human initiations actually mirror a cosmic initiation and certain events that took place in our past or certain cosmic events that happened. So every single human initiation is a ritual or a type of initiation, no matter they're different ones, different kinds, that are actually connecting you to a cosmic event or historical event, because that's a gateway into your soul. An aspect of your soul that needs to be retrieved and reactivated for you to be whole. And there are ones that humanity shares, that we all share. Those are the big ones. And once you get all those, once you've been introduced to them, you've got the pieces. You've got them. And so now, how do you use them? How do you use your memories? You go through these amazing initiations and you start to remember all of these different things. How do you use them? Do you sell them to the highest bidder?
Mm-hmm.
Do you just share them with anyone who comes across you because you're so darn excited you have them and you don't have any control, or how do you do that? And that's really where you start to see who you are, because then you got the training wheels off and it's just you and your will and your power that you've built up, and you just hope that you don't dissolve it all, so. Because you can use your will to dissolve all of your power, all of your Kundalini energy, or you can use it to absolutely magnify it and amplify it. It's up to you.
Well, this is interesting too, because in the mystery school tradition, the way that Steiner talks about it, you get to a place where they're very careful about who they select because of that kind of classic thing that can happen if somebody gets too much knowledge too early. If they don't handle it right, they're actually in a worse place than when they started.
Oh, yeah.
So that's the tricky thing. You really have to be ready to move up that level. You've got these levels of getting information, and I talk about them where there's kind of an outer level of just public word of mouth stuff about mystery schools. And then you have private groups that work together to try to get certain types of results. And then you have arcane schools. They're a little more secret, where they keep the actual tradition of, but it's sort of, done in a repetition fashion. And then you have lesser schools, which know about half, just to be oversimplify it. And then the mystery schools, which kind of radiate all this information along to these others. So someone who might have an interest in initiation and spiritual development, working in a public or private setting is a perfectly good way to develop this idea that I can aspire directly and jump into that mystery school. And where's the mystery school? I need it now. You grow into it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is, again, we just have this horrible pattern of just materializing things and projecting our spiritual growth onto a person or onto an organization, and we think that when we have that, we'll get it. And I think that when you get into those, when you really start getting into those circles, I mean, I would say that the best mystery schools are in connection with higher beings and ascended beings.
Mm-hmm.
And those beings work with you when you're there, when you're ready. They'll appear to you, they'll work with you, and they'll recognize you. And that is when those kind of more miraculous things happen, with synchronicities and meeting people and things like that. It's really all following the higher beings that actually exist in a higher reality that those schools communicate with anyway. So it really is more about your personal development. And when you are meant to have those connections, then you will have them when you reach that. Because trust me, these angelic beings, they want you there. Mm-hmm. They want to see you grow. They want to see you evolve. So when you're at that level, then they'll absolutely, make contact with you.
That is fascinating. It's like there's a very different way to look at this. There's like an entertainment version of knowledge and mystery. And then there's the actual finding of the mystery schools and the levels involved there. When we've done shows, and we brought so much of the mystery school with your help, because it's doing the mystery school episodes with you that really opens it up, because you can live in that mystery. So, it's nice when people study it academically, but because you are deep in that intuitive work, it's very different. But I have seen, as a result of that, all of these kind of plastic versions of it pop up over the last couple of years while we've been talking about this. And it's like, we're the $333 mystery school. Mm-hmm. Get this course now, download it now. And, we know who we're talking about. But it's interesting to me because it's that kind of marketing aspect, which, it's fine to have sort of entertainment things around a theme, and you always will, especially when it gets into something deep and esoteric. But seriously, to call something a mystery school, I think that people get more levels of mystery school just listening to your stuff, So this is an interesting thing to me. So I'll read Steiner's quote, and we'll talk about what constitutes an actual mystery school and how this relates to the left-hand, right-hand path initiations. And everyone keep those questions coming in, because we're going to ask Gigi all your questions in the second hour of the program. And it's fantastic. It's a huge crowd tonight for Gigi, and it's great to have you back here. This is Steiner's quote on initiation from a series of lectures he did. Quote, "The highest point in an occult school of which it is possible to speak in a book for general readers is initiation. One cannot give public information concerning all that lies beyond, though the way to it can always be found by one who has previously pressed forward and penetrated the lower secrets and mysteries. The knowledge and power which are conferred upon a man through initiation could not be obtained in any other manner, excepting in some distant future after many incarnations on quite another road and in quite another form. He who is initiated today experiences something which he would otherwise have to experience at a much later period and under different circumstances. People should not be trusted with the use of firearms until they've had enough experience to make it certain that they will not use them mischievously or without care. If a person without the necessary preparation were initiated today, he would lack those experiences which in the normal course of his development would come to him in the future during other incarnations, and would then bring with them the corresponding secrets." Gigi, there's a difference there. He's saying that it's not something you can play around with lightly. You have to give it its due.
You do. And I think that one of the way that I would describe it is just a pure energetic standpoint, where when you receive an initiation or you go through an initiation, you get an exalted level of energy. That's how your body perceives it. It's just higher energy, faster energy. And the energy has specific qualities that we could read psychically as secrets or as wisdom when it hits our body, when it hits our bioenergetic field, our etheric body that contains all of our wisdom and the universalism. It does pop out certain secrets that you can use for, things. But also something very nefarious can happen as well on just a physiological level, is it can polarize you. Because if you're not integrated enough, if you're not at your center enough, you're not harmonized enough, and I mean like, really coherent in your energy, what will happen is receiving that huge amount of energy is just going to polarize you. And then you're sort of in this almost like a bipolar state, not in the psychological use of that term, but you're in like, your ego becomes augmented, but also your light kind of becomes more manic. And that's just a dangerous position it's very damaging. It's actually a very psychically damaging position to be in. And so, beyond the secrets that can burst into your awareness, there's also it can also be very difficult to contain that energy, because it'll augment your darkness essentially.
Right. It's gonna heighten both aspects, and if you're not ready, it could actually, as we were talking about, you could end up in a worse position.
And very few people can, once they're overexposed, can be strong enough and powerful enough with their will to constantly choose the light. And so what ends up happening is they get just completely polarized into their ego and completely polarized into their shadow, into their darkness, because they just can't contain that high, fast moving energy. They can't reconcile everything that needs to be reconciled, heal enough of that childhood trauma, or that they can't in the period that the energy that they're being exposed to is needing it to be. So what ends up happening is, for the majority of people, they'll just get polarized into a shadow version of themselves. Had they not been exposed to that level of energy, then they may have a more gradual awakening. And this was very obvious and very visceral in the time of Atlantis, and in the time of the earlier initiators, where energy was a lot more palpable. You could really, it was very obvious what would happen to somebody, these magical processes of initiation. And it was very obvious what would happen to a human being when they were exposed to these different levels of energy from the cosmos. It was very obvious in their bodies, in their minds. You could see what was going on there. And that's how these were perfected, is because there was a time where we could actually see what every initiation was linking to and what it did. And so.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. That's fascinating, because bringing in the Atlantis part is crucial, because we'd obviously achieved a great level, and the actual mystery schools come out of that Atlantean period, where they were concentrating group thought through this two-eye stone and reaching the saintly realm and getting their messages direct through this process. That's how they had trained them. It's very interesting to think of using that two-eye stone, as Cayce described it, later as, a laser gun.
Yeah,
in essence.
It's like, when I think of that, I think that, the first kind of stages of Atlantis was very, it's kind of more spiritual.
Yeah.
And it was all about making those connections to those saintly realms and grounding them and getting those patterns down. And then once it had reached a point where the crystal and the consciousness of the Atlanteans was more materialized, that's kind of what they did with it. So it's kind of like it goes through different stages, from very immaterial and very spiritual, and then it's gathering energy, it's gathering power as the earth cycles through all of these different cycles. It's condensing everything and condensing everything, all these spiritual cycles going from extremely spiritual to more and more material. And then finally there was like a power that they had with each other and also could be through the crystal. And then they, you know, they decided to zap each other with it. So, you know.
What's amazing to me about you saying that is the part of tonight's show that I didn't tell you about is literally about the Atlantean crystal aspect on the Mystery School. And I had it for the follow-up segment here. So this is, as usual, when we talk, Gigi, you tune in and you get the notes before I've given them to you. This is pretty wild, though. But I can feel that this is the right timing now. I'm going to read this. These are reading extracts directly from the Cayce readings on exactly what you're talking about. And the reason that I was going to bring these in is because there's so much about Belial in here, and I don't think that we understand Cayce's work on Belial. As a matter of fact, even the ARE kind of shuns this aspect of Cayce's work because it's pretty advanced. You know, Cayce's writing in the 1920s about them having craft in Atlantean time that could fly through mountains. The fact that they're flying is pretty already changes history, but the fact that they could fly through things, you know, this is very sci-fi to them. And I think that as an organization, and you know, they've done a lot of great stuff, the Cayce Foundation, but I think that this aspect of Belial and the Two-Eyes Stone is something that they have a hard time in their own ranks figuring out what to do with. So I think it gets ignored a lot, actually, interestingly enough. But this is the conflict between the Belial group and the Amelius group. So I'm going to read a couple of extracts, and then we're going to try to jump in and see how this battle is playing out now. So let's see if we can connect these two. Okay, so he's giving these readings for people, and he's going through their past lives to where they are in Atlantis, and many of them are involved in this battle between the Amelius group and the Sons of Belial in Atlantis. So he says, the entity was in the Atlantean period before the second of the turmoils that separated the islands and broke up the land into islands. Because remember, it's one big continent in the Atlantic Ocean, and then their activities, shooting at each other with the Two-Eyes Stone, sets off all this volcanic activity, and it splits into three islands, Poseidia, Og, and Alta. So he says, in the city of Eden in Poseidia did the entity then dwell. This is a pretty interesting name, Eden.
Yeah, I was going to say.
The entity was among the Atlan lands and peoples, and of those that served in the temple during the building of the temple of the One, the law of One, with the understanding of the law of One. Then the entity became enamored with those of Belial and faltered in the experience, yet it was forgiven through those sojournings in the understandings given through Quo Auda. Now this is very interesting. Quo Auda is Quoauda. And this is a very unusual name that shows up in the readings. No one's ever really done any follow-on about who Quo Auda was, but he's this huge counterpoint, like Amelius, to the Belial figures. And then he has to say, in relation to this, they're trying to find out, well, when was this split into three islands? Like, give us an actual date. And he said, as indicated from that given, this entity was in Atlantis when there were the second period of disturbance, which would be some 22,500 years before the periods of the Egyptian activity covered by the Exodus in the Bible. It was then some 28,000 years before Christ, C. And this is very interesting because he also gives us the date then of Moses by giving it in relation to this. So there we have in 28,000 BC, the explosion and the splitting into three islands, and the Two-Eyes Stone being operated out of Poseidia by the law of One people, still trying to use it in Cayce's cosmology to connect to the saintly realm, and then the Belial people using it for military purposes. So, you know, in a sense, Gigi, we carry this as a legacy now, where we have EMPs and we have nuclear weapons, and we have all these things that we can use at a destructive level that's comparable with Atlantis. So the question becomes, is this why the mystery schools made this decision sometime in the 19th century? We're going to let this information out about Atlantis.
I think so. I do. I think that the most effective way to prevent, it's funny, but the most effective way to prevent perhaps a nuclear meltdown or whatever that may be is actually to have people remember. At some point, remember and plant the seeds so that when we come into this very cosmically accelerated time that we're moving into now, that those seeds can start to rapidly grow, and there is a visceral memory of what we went through, and that will prevent anything from going on. I think it's probably one of the techniques or one of the things that the schools did because I think, these are beings and individuals that understand how consciousness works and how spiritual information integrates at the deepest level of the deepest level that any information is ever going to affect you is on a personal level, period. That's why we relate to each other. It has to be relatable. And so when you plant those seeds of the biggest wound that we have, which is the fall of Atlantis, then we'll come across this time where we're cycling right back to that time again now, where we'll remember. So it's giving us those seeds so that we can remember, and it is our personal memories and our feelings with it that will pull us and compel us to move in certain ways. Even if our logical mind doesn't understand it, we'll just be repelled by things or attracted by things. So it's a very deep way of preparing humanity for something while they're still able to choose,
Right. Yeah. Well, right now there's that chance, that window. And I guess a lot of what you and I talk about when it comes to the mystery schools, and the question I wanted to pose to you is, what is the legacy of the mystery schools in this? Because they've left us something. They've vouchsafed this information for us. Here it is, 2020, and we see this kind of bizarre mayhem. We see a real fast track towards transhumanism and chipping everybody and all that. It's like they've gone into circus overdrive in order to make this happen. What are the mystery schools leaving us over this course of, say, letting this information out the last 200 years, but specifically through groups like Theosophy, Anthroposophy, the Gurdjieff work, the Cayce work? There's a theme there. Atlantis is in the heart of it. But what are the tools, in a sense? What have they packaged up there for us?
Well, it's our return back to ourselves. It's our return back to our spirit. It's to be whole again. It's to recover from the fall and to rise. And that's really what it's all about. I mean, Atlantis represents the fall. And so why it's centered around Atlantis is we have to rise through the same portal, the same initiations in which we fell, which we failed. So we have to constantly be surrounded by it. And the great teachers of Atlantis have incarnated, back to back, and, they didn't incarnate together again, but they've incarnated to teach their piece, to teach their part in this lower density. And so hopefully we can reach into the collective and grab those pieces and put it together. But the legacy is the rise, and hopefully we can rise from the fall. And that's what I would say it is. And all of those techniques that had to be developed for this density, by the way, there's a sacredness to that. So all of those techniques, all of that is part of that legacy. And it's the individual's unique journey to choose what order to do those in and discern that.
I like that, putting it on an individual level. That's where I would too, because that's what it comes down to in the mystery school work. Speaking of it as a broad group, let's say that the society, in order to move forward, inside that mystery school information is a key. And unless the society gets its hands on the key, and you've talked about this, there's going to be a bifurcation, a split, where these people are going to march off into this destiny of destructive oblivion and transhumanism and robots, kids, and a real soulless experience. And then there's going to be a different group moving in this way that gets the lesson and has picked up the key from the mystery schools. How does that, I mean, we're kind of at that crossroads. Steiner had seen it back in 1917, identifying the period this way. So, but how does that all play out?
Oh, it's so interesting, because when I started seeing in my visions the bifurcation, I was like, oh, everybody's talked about this. This is in the Bible. This is, several intuitives have talked about this. Steiner's talked about it. And then I looked back at Steiner's work, and I was like, he made schools. He talked about biodynamic farming. He was laying down a foundation for, he saw the bifurcation. He was laying down a foundation for one of the bifurcations, because he included everything in it. And nobody knew what he was doing, because he was actually more futurist than transhumanism will ever be. Talking about biodynamic farming, children, the warmth, schooling. I mean, he was more of a futurist than any person that's with transhumanism, beep beep boop boop, computers. No, it's in the farming, it's in the children, it's in the warmth, it's in the spirit. That's what it is. That's what the future is. That's humanist, and so he was really bang on with that. And I think that for me, I think it's clearest in his work, what he was seeing, and he was helping to create that one bifurcation, while there were also groups that were steadily and readily preparing themselves for the other fork.
Right.
So
it's like they're laying down in Anthroposophy the tracks. It's like the foundation for, if the societal thing collapses, you will have the tools for your own food. You'll have the tools for your own education. Your spiritual development can continue through that.
Right. It's here. And here's 100 years to get it down.
Right.
Here's that he gives you 100, however many years to sort it out and get familiar with it, work out the kinks, find the best teachers, the best farmers, the ones that are good at it, and get something there, and get it started.
Well, that's really interesting. Using your own visionary lens on this, what happens with this other group, the kind of Belial 2.0 group, the Armonic overhang around them? They're getting sucked in fast. We should explain, we've done so many episodes, you and I, on the eighth sphere, that it is a shorthand. And we know it well, and our viewers mostly know it well, but we should explain the eighth sphere idea fundamentally in Anthroposophy is that there's a sphere that's being created as an artificial step in our evolution. And the idea is we can picture it as a kind of virtual reality realm where we get lost in these thoughts and pulled in, and Ahriman separates us and says, hey, the scientific materialism is all you need. The spirituality has nothing to do with real life. Get sucked into this. And then people think that they are developing normally, but they're getting sucked into this sphere that's being built. The sphere is in space, and yet it is a consciousness sphere. And this idea of the eighth sphere leaked out, actually, through Theosophy. And Steiner said that it was such a secret that the schools weren't ready for it to come out. And he came out to clarify it because in Theosophy, he felt they had got it wrong. And so we have this whole idea about Ahriman creating this 8th sphere reality. So this split that we're talking about, which we're at that crossroads in 2020 for sure, those people going down that transhumanist track, they're becoming food. They're sort of fodder for the 8th sphere.
Oh, yeah. They've been probably investing in it their whole life, maybe for many different lives, that they now begin to identify more with the 8th sphere than with reality, than with now, and living in a complete fabricated world. And so that's really what the 8th sphere is perhaps understood first as an experience or a position where you're no longer in the now, you're outside of it. You're obsessing about the future or the past or whatever. You're kind of in that state and you're a little bit out of your body. That's really where you start to connect with this artificial realm, because you're really not in this realm anymore. And if you do that too much, and that's why, in a lot of his writings about Ahriman, he talks about like being distracted, and which we see a lot today with people just scrolling on their phone, not really reading anything, not really truly taking anything in and integrating it and putting it in their life, but just reading things, just reading whatever, not really connecting to it, integrating it. That's Ahrimanic. That's you're in a trance. You're just taking things in. You're a little bit outside of your body. Well, that's connecting you into that 8th sphere. You can connect into higher spheres when you're a little bit outside of your body, but you have to be prepared for that psychically, and you have to go through certain psychic initiations to go higher. So if you don't have any of those and you're just, going into that trance state, that unalert state, then you're sort of drifting off. You're not in the present moment. You're not even in the present cosmos anymore. You're going into something else. And that's where that begins.
It's interesting. It's the superficial treatment of your thought process that leaves you vulnerable, in a sense, because that's what you're talking about. And it's fascinating because you're floating away deeper and deeper into this thing, but it feels perfectly natural, because it is kind of like a drug experience in a sense.
Yeah. But at that same time, you can't stop the reality that you're a spiritual being, no matter how obsessed you become with the material world and how much you disbelieve in God. You can't stop being a spiritual being. And so what will happen is you'll just replace those spiritual desires with material things. So suddenly the government becomes God.
Right.
That is the authority that should be God in your life, your spirit in your life. Now that's the government. And Steiner also talks about this in people becoming too dualistic in their relationship to leadership, too nationalistic or too socialistic. And that's exactly what we're seeing. People, you could argue that that's what we're seeing today. You could make that argument. And so we're also seeing that polarization. It was actually pretty prophetic, his work on Ahriman.
It's remarkable. It's absolutely remarkable. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. We're here with Gigi Young. It's X Series 95, going deep now into these initiation mysteries. And this is Steiner and Ahriman. And really, I've pointed this out that I felt that Steiner spent 3 or 4 decades of his work trying to identify for us Ahriman, because it's so crucial. And he did all these other things, but it is quite remarkable. We're going to be taking your questions in the second part of the program, and Miss Olivia's got a lot of them. How are you doing out there?
Great. Can I throw a question at Gigi right away?
Sure.
Gigi, I know this is kind of a big question, but could you explain what the lure is? Why is it so easy for us to get seduced into fantasy and video games? Why are they so addictive? What are we avoiding by allowing ourselves to get hooked into these things?
I probably have a little bit of a different perspective because of my work, but I actually think that because children are not introduced to meditation and spiritual thought and spiritual practice at a young age, not teaching them, this is what to think, but, having them just basically connect with their breath and their bodies and things like that, is it leaves them at a great deficit. It leaves humanity at a great deficit. And they then begin to seek that feeling of relaxation or of comfort or of inspiration or of achievement or of any of these things. They begin to seek them in external things like video games or, whatever it may be. And it's actually because we are functioning at an incredible deficit that we won't even understand for generations. We'll look back and we'll be like, wow, we were, yeah.
What was going on with those people? Yeah.
But that's why I think that it's not that the thing is so seductive. It's that we don't know how to connect with nature. We don't realize what nature does. What is offered to us is overwhelming. It is an overwhelmment. When we go online, there's, like porno pictures and crazy cartoon things and like media that's triggering us. We're not enjoying that. We're just overwhelmed. And for that time, we're not facing what we should be facing. And then it just builds up. So we seek more overwhelmment. And that is feeding the 8 spirits, feeding the moon. I mean, it's feeding the negative chain for humanity because you're not doing the work. You're not going in there and healing, and you're not connecting with your soul, and you're not, you're doing the opposite of that. You're losing it.
Right.
And so I think that's really what we're looking at, is a deficit of spirituality, but also complete overwhelmment. I don't even think we're enjoying it. I think we're just so low that it's like an overwhelming distraction that we're finding that little bit of relief in. Kind of sorry, it's a little dark, but
no, actually,
Spot on.
This is the nature of the thing. One of the biggest problems I have with it, the way that things are presented, is it's so lacking in creativity also.
yeah.
This is why we hate commercials so much. They're just lacking, and they're appealing to the most base part of anyone's nature. And they're supporting that. And so people get stuck in that because they think, hey, that's the traditional thing that I'm being catered to. My ego is being catered to at this level. I'm comfortable. I'm happy here. And it's interesting, guys like who are out there who study the pharmaceutical companies. And there's one guy, John Rappaport, who uses a phrase, Hotel Auschwitz. Catherine Austin Fitz uses the phrase also. But it's this idea of like, getting very comfortable in your concentration camp.
Yes, that's such a good metaphor. And it's that's such a great way of saying it, because it's exactly what we're doing. And I mean, gosh, aren't human beings incredible in what we can endure?
Right.
But yeah, no, it's absolutely, the walls are closing in on the concentration camp for sure.
Yes, there's no question about it. We're going to jump into how the left-hand schools see initiation. And this is very interesting because I want to put this across to people who would think it's a very black and white situation, that you have white magic and black magic, or that you have the mystery schools and half of them are evil and half are good. Apparently, it's interesting because it doesn't actually work that way. And what I find interesting is the people who work on the left-hand path, which is associated more with dark magic, they're also very serious, and they're also have a very strong sense of will. Just like, it's like a weird inverted mirror of the people who are ascended masters on the right-hand mystery schools. And but the idea that they would be, you know, like slackers or something like that, perish the thought. They're very dedicated in the same way, and in that sense, you know, some of them, like Crowley's work and how it brings all these different factors in, it's admirable the level that he gets to in understanding the whole scheme, and that he's making the attempt. And he's also very open about where he's going with it, that he is going to do it for his own self-indulgence, and that he thinks that this is the actual religion. And you know, whereas we see a lot of people on the political side who adopt what he does, and they try to just present themselves as this, you know, great selfless person. So I want to get into that, because there are things we can learn by looking at the inverse of the mystery schools, the kind of dark secret society side, and that can actually expose them also.
Yeah.
But they look at it, Gigi, as in the case of Crowley, do as thou wilt to be the whole of the law. It's whatever you want to do, and you know, the consequences be damned. Right? This is the Belial trap. Also, Belial was very engaged in might is right, and if you can do it, it should be done, and that kind of thing. Those levels, though, of thinking, they can still utilize methods and techniques that are very effective, even though they're coming from a totally different place.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think the difference would be from a like just a practitioner standpoint. I think the difference would be that they would be burning up their life force energy.
Right.
So even though they're having results, and they are able to open portals, or able to influence, or able to achieve these things, the difference between like a school that is, you know thyself versus do what thou will. I mean, the know thyself school is teaching a way of perpetually renewing yourself, which is resurrection, which is the rebirth, and which means that you're no longer eating of the forbidden fruit. You're no longer dissolving your energy all the time. You're constantly being renewed. You constantly have more and more power. Every life you compound on the next. And because when you do magic, when you do these kind of things, you have to think about the long-term effects of what you're doing. Right. And so you want to do something that compounds your life in a way that's powerful. And I think even though in this life there may be this ability to, I mean, you know, do the same magic or do some powerful magic, you are depleting yourself. And that's why, you know, you'll see one path that literally wants to project, as you said, you know, they want to project their consciousness into their head and like put it on a box. Well, that's not how you think. If you genuinely understand the evolution of the soul and reincarnation and spirituality, you're not thinking that way. You know that doesn't happen. You don't materialize human evolution. You don't. That's just it's not our nature. That's a different thing. That's a whole alternative sphere. That's a whole different thing. That's a different creation. And you can respect it for that, and you can say, hey, that works, or maybe you can do that. But at the end of the day, will one day you have a reckoning where you say, oh my gosh, I've lost my soul? You know, that's the different paths. And you can really only, I think, understand those paths entirely if you can stretch them out over long periods of time and look at the practitioners and look at what's done.
Oh, it's fascinating, because they are tempting people to project their consciousness into a cube, and there is the possibility of getting trapped in that. The idea that your consciousness could exist without you physically and develop, you know, that's very interesting, because the mystery schools have shown us that the endocrine system, you know, and where the soul resides inside of that, the consciousness operates out of that. And then, so the idea that you can project your consciousness and just leave your body behind to do that, and that's good enough to do is really interesting. That somebody like Musk, for example, who talks about this type of thing, it's quite absurd. But it is, it's an inverse again, because we know that people who are spiritually advanced can astral travel. They can operate outside of their body, for sure. But the idea of your consciousness living in some weird avatar while your body is actually responsible for your personal consciousness experience. So that is a real interesting thing for them to introduce, because it is quite a trap. Because people could think, hey, I can, project my consciousness into this cube.
Oh, it's so symbolic, because it's this fear of death. And we all have a fear of death because we all have a fear of change. But what's really going on is we die all the time. We die all the time. When we face a fear, a part of us dies and is reborn.
Right.
That is, this process is intrinsic in who we are. And then when we become so arrogant as to say that I don't need to go through this natural process that created the very being that I am, I no longer need to go through this. I mean, that's really what we're seeing, is I don't need to die. I don't need to go. And this is exactly the type of the refusal to go through ego death. The refusal to go through that very painful dark night of the soul, ego death, where you realize, wow, I was not a very good person. I hurt people. I, did this thing, or I did that thing, or for a long period of my time, I was not a very good person. And then to go through that process, and why, and to go through that, that's a death and rebirth. And so they're saying, I don't need to look at myself. I don't need to do that. And honestly, if you do that enough, you're probably so terrified because you don't know how to die. You don't know how to die while you're alive, or really die. And that's why so many of the mystery schools talked about death. And they were, the Bardo realms, and those realms that you traverse, the planetary realms. I mean, we do that in life too. So it's the avoidance of an entire process that makes us who we are, and that's why they're no longer human. You have to earn your humanity. You have to live in it. And so that's why we're seeing something different. And if they do choose to go in it, like you said, it's not going to be consciousness as we know it anyway. Like you said, if you can't get the vibration in the fluids, then you're not really.
Exactly. It's a totally different thing. That's absolutely fascinating. And it reminds me of, when the mystery schools describe the Egyptian mystery schools, they talk about how they use the sarcophagus in the Great Pyramid for that ritual where you die for 3 days and then you pick your body back up. And every student had to go through that. And of course, by the time you get to the Christ story in the resurrection, he's killed on the cross, he's put into the tomb. 3 days later, he rises up and he goes out. It's because that is the mystery tradition. And then he embodies it for real by picking his dead body back up again.
Yeah. That is everything. I mean, once you can, if you can only grasp one thing, it's just to grasp that. And that's why it's the center of Christianity. That's why it's the center of the most practiced religion on the planet. So that's, if you can understand that thing, even on a metaphorical level, it will do something to you, because it's teaching us about how to die, and it's teaching us about human potential. And, it's just something that's why people associate the Antichrist, with transhumanism and with this whole path, is because it's literally not dying. It's literally no resurrection. It's literally the opposite. It is the inversion, as you say.
Wow, absolutely. And, this makes me think of something that you talk about. This gets really interesting when you talk about it as well, is the idea that they're trying to reanimate these mummies.
Oh yeah, I had some very strange visions I get these weird visions, but I think that's part of the crazy materialist focus, where it's like, instead of bringing forward a Christ-like quality within ourselves, or embodying this quality within ourselves and bringing it forward, we're going to bring forward this god or this goddess, and then, resurrected. It's that literalization again. And that over-literalization. It's like you read a magical text that's been translated 80 times, and then you take it literally, kind of feel.
Right, exactly. They had an experiment with National Geographic where they spent all this money to reanimate a pharaoh's voice box.
Oh, yeah.
And they came up with this very strange, I guess I should have recorded that for tonight. I didn't know we were going to talk about this. It is a weird sound. It's just like, I won't try to imitate it, but it just sounded like the letter E stretched out,
Like,
That's pretty good.
And you're just like, you spent how much money for that?
Well, I wonder a little bit, because we've gotten into some very interesting things in the X series recently where we have, for example, Ted Williams was this baseball player, and he got involved with this company, or his family involved him with this company that would cryogenically freeze him. And then people who worked there were like, oh, they had the head separated from the body. And so all these kind of strange scandals came out about it. And then it found out that other athletes like Muhammad Ali and other people were involved with this. This thing about freezing, one of the big whistleblowers in the documentary I did on Howard Hughes, he talked about Howard Hughes being fascinated by this and about seeing Hughes cryogenically frozen before he was supposed to have died. What is going on there, Gigi? Because I think about this as an attempt at mummification, the technology of mummification. And I even saw the Egyptian experiment as some kind of, we're going to revive through technology these dead.
It is. It's, well, the first thing that was coming that I'll just say before I forget it is it almost seems like an inverted sacrifice. So how they sacrifice for information, they also try to resurrect for information. I think that's something that could be going on, kind of like an inversion thing. But I remember that there was a lot higher technology. It's not clear to me when the time is, if it's Atlantis or exactly when it's a little foggy for what the time period is, because the dimension's higher. But there was a technology where there were people, great teachers, that were essentially frozen, and they would be pretty much like cryogenically frozen. And I never, I think you kind of figured it out here. I didn't put that together. Like I didn't put together like the Walt Disney style, like freezing. Yeah. I just didn't. So you figured, I didn't connect that to it. I just thought of it as I just had these memories of these different chambers and being asleep, and I just remember the different kind of chambers, and then I remember that kind of fading away. Earth no longer had the technology to keep their dead in a certain way, in a certain state, and I think it had to do with not living forever. But the reason why these great teachers were frozen, these kings and queens were frozen, was so that their consciousness could still interact with the collective and still participate with the collective. It was to keep them in the density. It was to keep an aspect of them in the density so that they could communicate with people, and they could communicate with the circles that they were involved with. If they were to completely leave, then they would be without this huge swath of information and experience that helped to make Earth what it was. You don't want to lose that person. You want them to be communicating. And so that was what it was all about. And there was a period where kings went through that, and then also queens went through that, and their consciousness was contributing to the collective. Their memories were available and things like that, these higher beings. So that's what that was about. It had nothing to do with living forever, and everything to do with providing a service. It wasn't even about power, because if anything, it was exhausting for them to constantly be utilized in that way. So that's almost like a weird take on that, if I were to say. But eventually they lost that ability to use that technology, which was a very psychic technology that used crystals and water and sometimes wood and stuff like that. And so they lost that technology. And so they developed mummification. And Egypt, what I believe is going on with the Egyptian mummification is they're trying to put them in a sarcophagus, which is really a sleeping chamber, which is their version of a sleeping chamber, kind of like that tribe that built the wooden airplane. That was like, we have an airplane too, but it was like, it was like wooden and it didn't fly, but they built it because they saw it. It was kind of like that, where they try to do the technology as close as they possibly could. And they tried to adapt to the lowering density of Earth. You have to adapt your technology every time we lower in density into a dark age. The technology has to be advanced. You get into the dark age, you're dealing with canopic jars and wood. That's pretty much, it was all about your consciousness at that point. There wasn't any real technology that could be used.
I love that.
That's kind of what I saw.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I also love the cargo cult aspect of it, because this is what it looks like, and we're kind of summoning you down.
Yeah, that's yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And also, if you look at Egyptian mummification, just like the pyramids, if you start 6,000 years ago and you go forward, like, it's incredible and ornate and unique. And then by the time you get to Ptolemy, it's like, basically they've shoved someone in there, and it sort of looks like it used to do. But you look at those mummies and they're like, oh, they've pretty much decayed. But if you look at Ramses, he's fine.
Isn't that incredible? So maybe they were, it's what they did was incredible. But you can definitely tell with Egypt that the earlier dynasties are totally different than the last.
Yeah.
The culture left. You can see it, becoming a shadow of itself.
Well, that wisdom goes underground, and it seems to happen around Akhenaten. When they get rid of Akhenaten, they lose the mystery elements. Absolutely fascinating. Whenever you get on that track of thinking of those Egyptian mummies as like a library resource, I think to myself, that's something no one's, they're always thinking, oh, they're saving these bodies to resurrect them. But the idea of them as a resource and that you can connect with them, because they're preserved, that's fascinating. Absolutely very interesting. I mentioned to you that there's a Cayce dream while he's having a reading where he is in this place in Washington. He's in like a national archive, and he's in there with a mummy. And the mummy tells him to close the door, and there are all these press people trying to get in. And the time period is right around now. It's like 2022. And he's having this fantastic dream in this reading. And the mummy says, quick, you have to make me cornmeal, figs, and dates, and I'll revive before they get in here. And he's freaked out, and he does it immediately, and it eats it, and it revives. So they've always called this little ingredients mummy food in Cayce circles. But Gigi, there is something weird with that, because Cayce had the Rata experience, and he's plugged in with that whole development of the Egyptian civilization. He has this access to Egyptian history.
Yeah, that is an incredible story. And it makes me wonder, maybe people are portals, and, it's kind of like, are you resurrecting the person that you think you're resurrecting?
Oh, yeah.
Or is the body a shell that you're incarnating something else into? And because I think that that's something that we have to consider, is that people are portals too. And so, the mummy food is just incredible. I'm sure people just like got their blender out and like blended up their figs or their dates and were eating it, and they're like, but I think with that, it's probably that those were enchanted items for that mummy. So perhaps it was, they were imbued. That was the key. And that it was a personal thing for the mummy rather than like an overall thing. That's sort of perhaps what it is.
Or we eat figs and dates and we become psychic like Gigi Young, but only for like a day, basically. Amazing. And this is fascinating. You're making me think of all sorts of interesting things. There's a there's a whole track about Rata also. Edgar Cayce is Rata. And I want to touch on this real briefly because we have some very interesting comparisons of some of the characters that came through during Crowley's sessions and some of these gray aliens. But just before we get to that, how are you doing over there, Mr.
Good. Esoteric 369 Wall said, did Cayce have past life recall? Wow, did he ever?
Yeah, some of the best.
I would say that's a yes.
Some of the best, yeah. Cayce was the best.
This is a very interesting picture of Rata here. And this is quite fascinating because Rata, Cayce as the priest Rata in this period. This is 10,000 BC, and he is working with the Atlanteans to build the pyramids. He comes in, and the way that Rata is described, he comes in, and his mother is a daughter of Zu without an earthly father, and there's no further explanation. Now, we know things about virgin births in the Bible with Christ, and it's hinted at in other traditions. But there's something very unusual about this. And then his appearance is very unusual. He has no hair, and he has this kind of steel blue eyes, and he's Caucasian. He comes from the Caucasus Mountains with a tribe, and they take over Egypt. And then he integrates everything for Atlantis, and he spends all this time in Atlantis. But Gigi, this period of Rata setting up Egypt with the pyramids and the Sphinx, it seems to be that all of that was set up as kind of a bookend to help us in this period to understand what's going on, because that's where, according to Cayce as Rata, they put the records, the Hall of Records under the Sphinx from Atlantean times.
Yeah, it's kind of like he was, thinking ahead, and he was making that kind of capsule culture that had to contain, it's like a capsule culture, had to contain every element of every seed that had to proliferate into the future.
Right.
Yeah, it's almost like it's like an early Christ figure for a different time.
Right. Absolutely. But and it's interesting, there is an echo there with Rata and Egypt, that when we look at Egypt now, I think about the big King Tut craze of the 70s and 80s, where his sarcophagus and his tomb was on display and going around, and it was just Tut mania. You can find these books and see all this stuff, and but I wonder about that, because I think to myself, we're having that memory of Egypt. Egypt had inherited the Atlantean culture. This is part of that awakening for us.
Yeah. It is. And I think he also said that we were supposed to discover the Hall of Records at a certain time.
Yes.
Didn't he? And it's coming up. So it's almost like we're coming into that again. And maybe as we retrace that timeline to Atlantis, as we were doing, we'll also go over that time on Egypt as well.
Right.
Because if it's a legacy culture of Atlantis, that means that it's on the Atlantean timeline. So we'll also, as we progress, we'll also cross back over the Egypt legacy technically before we maybe do the Atlantis one, or around the same time. There will be an overlap there. So perhaps we'll actually remember Atlantis first through very Egyptian style memories, or things that we associate with Egypt that are actually Atlantean overlap.
That is fascinating, actually. And it seems like that's the beginning for us. It's almost like Atlantis, is the memory that's blocked back there, but Egypt's that beginning where we start all over again. And it's interesting. They had asked Cayce, are there pyramids, in the Great Pyramid, are there predictions contained within that Great Pyramid? And he said, oh, yeah. And they said, well, how are they? Like, where can we find them? And he said, it's in the measurements and in the type of rock and in like the curve that they're set up in. It's like a mathematical language. And they said, what kind of prophecies are there? And he says, oh, it's prophecy of basically all of world history. And it says, how specific is it? And he says, oh, it gives things right down to the street and the address that the person would be born in. What does that tell you, Gigi? It's a big machine that's organizing the future.
It is. And I think what I would say that he's getting at is that is the experience of the pyramid. So when you go into the pyramid, your consciousness will move through those mathematical lines and it will render information to you. So it's not that they're written on the walls, it's that he's talking about, because intuition is just mathematics. It's the experience of mathematics. If I'm sitting with you or I'm sitting with Olivia, if we were just to sit with each other, there would be a burn off of energy that would, it's kind of like a burn off, but it's a reckoning, a third force that is whatever you need to know at this time. Or you can angle it in different ways, but there's this third force that's always working when things combine. Right. And so when you go into a pyramid or you go into any ancient site, you will calibrate with it, and there will be a burn off or there will be an alchemy that will occur, and then you will get the downloads of information, and the pyramid will have to be built in a certain way with a certain intention to do that. And the person that's going into that will have to be accustomed with a large enough, probably for that kind of information, they're going to have to be able to contain that kind of information. But anybody could probably go in there and get something. But depending on where you are, it will be the limitations of your insight with it. So I think it's that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, actually being inside the sacred architecture.
That's what I would say. I mean, maybe there's also, something written somewhere or something, but as you were saying that, it seems like even with their hieroglyphics, like I have memories of walking through temples, Isis temples and stuff in Egypt, and reading two pillars at the same time, and doing things like that, or walking through things and I'm not reading the hieroglyphics on one pillar and then on the other pillar I'm reading them together. It's like I can't, and so it seems to me like they were using some kind of circuitry, and you even see it on crafts and stuff like that. They'll use the hieroglyphics and stuff on crafts, but it does something to human consciousness when it's like you merge with it. And they knew how to make physical objects like pillars and like temples that would move your consciousness in a certain way to communicate things with you. So it wasn't reading, it was like a downloading of information from the collective or from an advanced being by the way that things were shaped or things were done. Hit you in a certain way.
I see what you're saying. So you'd interact with it rather than just sort of, I'm reading this interesting sacred text. You're actually experiencing it. Yes,
you're actually, you're kind of merging with it. You're experiencing it, and they're created in such a way where when you go into a certain state, it interacts with you. And so it's a totally different way of learning, and it's the language that we had before the fall, in a sense. And so there was still that going on in Egypt for a period of time, the overlap time. And so you can still see that way of learning, and you can still see that way of record keeping as well. The most pure form of record keeping that you're going to have is symbols,
Right.
Symbols and a good and people who know how to work with them is going to be the best records.
Right, absolutely. Cayce said that the Hall of Records, the records existed in 3 different places, and that the records are one. And he said that one of them was under the Sphinx, the paw of the Sphinx. One of them was in the sunken temple off of Bimini in Poseidia. which is where the Bimini Wall is, and that's rising, and that the other one was in Yucatan. My question for you, I know that these groups and governments have looked for these things. Have they gotten near to the Hall of Records, do you think? Do you think that they've had access to them?
I think that I think that the records work in such a way where they may have to try to resurrect a mummy to use them, because they may have discovered, even if they do have a couple artifacts, that they don't work according to physical laws, that there is an X factor that makes them almost impossible to control, especially as we come into very intense cosmic rays, and that is consciousness of the individual. And so I think that even if you do have a crystal or you have a certain relic from Atlantis, I don't think it functions in the way that a machine does, which is what they're comfortable with. Binary. That's like, this is not binary. This is beyond binary. This is a third thing in here, right? So it's like, I think that even if they did have that, I think they would really struggle on how to use it. And so there's a whole bunch of information that's essentially locked because it takes a certain level of ethics to open it. And so perhaps that's what's going on with the mummy, is that once you realize that no matter how many psychics you force to work for you, or no matter how many remote viewers you try to get to work for you, it doesn't mean that they're going to have that kind of access. Not all psychics can access the same stuff, right? So I think that they may have certain things, absolutely, but it doesn't mean that they know how to use them properly, because there's a safety on it. That's my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you got?
I just wanted to ask about guardians and gatekeepers on other dimensions.
I'm sure there's sentinels with the really important stuff. What do you think?
Yes, there's absolutely, because when we were talking about earlier on how when you reach a certain initiation, you start to share certain things. You share your truths. Well, you're a kind of a centennial of that truth. There are certain portions of information that absolutely are protected. That doesn't mean that technologies can't be dangerous or that things are extremely destructive, because they are, but it does mean that there's certain levels of things that cannot be unlocked. There's certain aspects that will never be unlocked by that consciousness, but they can still be very dangerous. I would say that. Yeah, so they're still dangerous. They can still do crazy things, but there's still a part that is guarded, as Olivia says.
I did it's really interesting, actually, because it crosses over into some work when I've done some interviews with Dr. Joseph Farrell, and he talks about archaeology wars when they go after sacred artifacts, and they have this meaning, and there are programs involved with it. And at a certain point, maybe like a decade ago, I thought my deep state research and my esoteric research are two different branches. And then the more I dug into it, you'd find out things like the CIA had spent all this time infiltrating the Cayce organization to try to find information on the lost Hall of Records. And they did that in 1964. And this brings me right up to date, because this popped into my mind when you were talking about it, which is, the TTSA, they're engaged in some of this as well, because what we see with TTSA is now that they're kind of UFO, exploitation, entertainment, New York Times, the UFO threat is here, Chris Mellon money freak show has been going on. Suddenly, Gigi, in the past month, something very interesting has happened, which is that the CIA agent Elizondo shows up in white talking about maybe consciousness and aliens is something that is there but isn't there. And he's like, come to Lou. So maybe, Gigi, they want to also, use this kind of covert machinations to try to get their hands on this consciousness idea, to get their hands on the Atlantis idea, to the point, and we've discussed this before privately, where they may attempt, instead of UFO disclosure, a false Atlantis disclosure.
This is something, this is something that I've seen, is discussing this. People discussing this idea of a false Atlantis rising.
Right.
Or a false Atlantis disclosure, and discussing how it can be done in different aspects of that. I've seen that. And it was really a horrific thought, because the idea is, and this is very much Ahriman as well, is to bring you things before you're ready, is to bring you something that you need, but kind of a mockery of it before you're ready. And it kind of gets you on this wrong track. You can't discern it. And that's sort of, it ties very well into what we're talking about today. But they do need to harness that narrative. They need to harness the Atlantis narrative. And to harness the Atlantis narrative, they need to harness the consciousness narrative. It needs to be harnessed to use the technology with any degree of accuracy and power. That's where you really get into the power, is when you can use the consciousness. That's where it really, that's where you're really cooking with gas. But even with the Atlantis narrative, they really need to harness that, because it's the whole reason why the mystery schools were seeding it to begin with, so people could remember. Mm-hmm. But then here's this group of people that are coming and telling you before you remember. So when you do start to go through this remembering process, this kind of psychic awakening process, it's like, oh, well, here it is. Oh yeah, here it is. Synchronicity. It's Lou, So,
Oh my God.
Lou is Rata. That's David Wilcock.
Oh, that's right. Yes. Lou has his own fragrance. Mm-hmm. Everyone watching the Dark Journalist Show, we're here with Gigi Young, X Series 95. We're going deep into the initiation process. It's brought us into Egypt and the Atlantis Hall of Records that Edgar Cayce talked about. It's hinted at also in other traditions like Steiner and Gurdjieff. This is interesting to me, though, because we've been tying in a lot of things like Musk and SpaceX and the things they're doing with Mars to this occult aspect. And the TTSA also getting in there after coming out and saying, oh, we're this big UFO organization, and then saying, no, we're an entertainment consortium. We have nothing to do with UFOs. And then coming out and saying, well, actually, we're really interested in ancient civilizations now. Mm. That CIA around the ancient civilizations mystery almost gives me more creeps than the CIA around the UFO file.
100%.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's the origins thing.
Well, they're trying to control how you remember and relate to yourself.
Right.
I mean, they're getting you from both angles. I mean, they're getting you in the exoteric spiritual sense, where if you've ever had a spiritual experience, they're getting you that by controlling the alien interdimensional narrative, because a lot of people have those as spiritual awakenings. And then they're also kind of controlling your spiritual awakening process by controlling they want to control that Atlantis narrative. And so it really is, they're really cornering both areas of the market for right. Consciousness. Because it just is. You cannot psychically awaken unless you remember part of who you were in past lives, because part of your psychic gifts will directly mirror your past lives. And so you'll get these bleed throughs, and you'll relate to Atlantis, you'll relate to your past life, you'll identify with it. And so there's really no avoiding ancient civilizations when we come into our own.
Absolutely. Well, the idea of a counterintelligence agent in the midst of this very kind of almost intimate spiritual process. Wow. That is just the kind of, gall that intelligence agencies have. This is remarkable to see them getting into these areas. Lam. We have to get to Lam.
Oh, dear.
Lam, and then your questions, everyone. All right, quick setup. Aleister Crowley. This is very interesting, actually. In 1917, Aleister Crowley decides, I'm going to declare that the left-hand schools know more than the right-hand schools. And the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to do a critique, line by line, of The Voice of the Silence by H.P. Blavatsky. Now, Blavatsky had already died in 1891, but Voice of the Silence is that kind of theosophical classic. And he said, I'm going to show that it's my new Horus, Aeon of Horus thing. This is really the new thing, and that this right-hand mystery school of theosophy and anthroposophy, forget it. He shows up at the Gurdjieff Institute as well, and Gurdjieff kicks him out, interestingly enough. But I will say his line-by-line critique on Voice of the Silence is quite fascinating. While he's doing that, in the process of this, he identifies Lam, and then he sets up an art exhibit called Dead Souls in New York.
Dead Souls?
Dead Souls, yes. And then in amongst the different art things is a piece of him doing this art piece of Lam. Now let's take a look at Lam, and you have some very interesting things to say about it. But let's start with this, which is this being communicated with him. And Crowley gave Lam the number 71. This is not so well understood. But maybe before this is over, we will. That's Lam. Now, Lam, Gigi, it's been pointed out, and you've pointed it out very well, resembles the gray alien a lot. His eyes are a little different, but the size of the head and the concentration of the head is sort of the kind of moving center. Is quite profound. There's some variations that have been done by students over the years. That's an interesting one.
Wow.
Really getting in there.
That's very much like the Star Trek episode.
It is.
The pilot.
It absolutely is. The one thing that happened in the middle of all this is there's someone who was that Crowley was a mentor to, who went through his art collection and really wanted this painting, and he said, I'm going to give it to you, and he gave him a negative of it. And this was one of his real favorite pupils. So this was kind of ironic and an odd thing to do. So some people have taken a look at that negative and done some things with it, if I can point that out. First of all, well, I'm going to show this because I have it right in front of me. This is a combination picture of different grays and the communion gray with Lam. And this one shows Lam with the gray eyes up above here. Because when you look deeply in there, there's something that looks like eye sockets. But clearly, Gigi, it looks like he's integrating, he's communicating with what we would call an alien.
Yes. And when I discovered Lam, I couldn't believe how similar he looked to the abduction sketches that came out. But Lam actually predates abductions. It's it's only after Crowley summons Lam that we get the abductions. It's actually an interesting correlation, but Lam absolutely has that bulbous head, and even bringing in the Ahriman theme of the night, Ahriman says that it's about the head, doesn't he?
Yes.
It's all about the head, and then they want to freeze their head. And then if you even look at Ahriman in the thumbnail for this live stream that we're doing, even Ahriman's head is white.
It is.
Too. So there seems to be like some sort of deformity, if I could say that occurs where, it's very similar to it's more jagged.
Right.
But it's very similar in the head shape.
It is. I mean, there's almost an alien aspect even to Ahriman.
The eighth sphere.
Right. Well, when you look at Lam, you'd think maybe an inhabitant of the eighth sphere.
That's what I was thinking. I was just like, this really feels to me like we are getting the eighth sphere, we're getting the grays, we're getting transhumanism, we're getting into this whole thing before it even started to manifest in a way we could recognize it. So we're just getting Lam, or we're just starting to kind of, I feel like we're just kind of starting to get it when we, that's my impression anyway.
No, there's no question about it. Parsons, and we'll do a more complete show on Parsons. We'll have you back for that, because there's a lot of interesting aspects there that you've picked up on with him. Jack Parsons, of course, is basically the father of our rocket program, just like von Braun was the father of the Nazi rocket program, and was quite a remarkable scientist. And he fell in with the Thelema crowd, which is Crowley's religion, and Crowley adopted him very closely. And I always love the letter, because he's also good friends with L. Ron Hubbard. This is a great letter that Crowley writes him and says, I'd watch out for that guy. I don't think he has the best morals.
About L. Ron Hubbard, yeah.
So when you think about, if Crowley's calling you out for your moral code, then it's a problem. And it turned out to be true, because, of course, L. Ron Hubbard screwed over Jack Parsons, took his girlfriend and his money and his boat. But it's very interesting also, Scientology has that deep space mythology inside there as a way to suck you in. You need to get up to this level to be perfect with your space gods. But there is something, Gigi, in this, which is Parsons associated with setting up the early version of NASA. He is, like I said, the father of our rocket program, and he is so dedicated that he's to Crowley and Crowley's work, and he spent all this time on it since he's been growing up in high school, that by the time he's in the 1940s and he's well established as a scientist, he is doing magical rituals at Crowley's instruction in the desert, trying to do this Babylon working manifestation of this other realm here. And it is true, and that right around that period is when all these UFOs start showing up, which falls on from the Lam thing. What is it that's going on there? And I mean, are these just, the Roswell aliens and all that stuff? Are they just craft coming in from somewhere else? What is this? What is this aspect of the alien part?
It's an interesting thing to consider when you zoom out and you put it all together. I think that we may be able to zoom out even further if we were to consider, I didn't think of this. This is actually someone else's stuff that I came across. I can't remember who it is because it was years ago, but it totally rang my alarm bells. They were talking about how some of the Enochian magicians were involved in legacy magic, of always kind of reincarnating a new magical system and communicating with these beings, and that they had worked up a magical system of communication where they were purposefully building technology, and that's how they were moving generation after generation, building up into the atomic bomb and building up. It was all about building up technology, but it was happening perhaps even farther back, and perhaps Crowley is part of this legacy, and perhaps Parsons is part of Crowley's legacy, and perhaps the legacy is larger than we think it is, and we're seeing these things as dots on a map that are unrelated, and perhaps we need to see them as more related and see the big picture, and then we'll understand things like CERN and things like NASA and things like Jack Parsons' rocket program, and maybe even some of the very, very early communications with what could be the grays or transhumanist consciousnesses that maybe they didn't know what they were at the time, but
Right.
I think, yeah.
Oh, it's absolutely fascinating, because when we think about the grays, the first thing that's observed is that, well, they have small bodies and big heads. And, you know, we have Crowley doing this in 1917, 30 years before any of this stuff.
Yeah.
And he's really originating that image, but over and over again. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it's almost like it works like this, where he's bringing it through.
Yeah.
And then he's initiating like other people. And the more people fall into this system of belief and magic, if you will, the more people that prescribe to this or get involved with this, the more permission these beings have to be here. And so that's why suddenly you see him communicating, perhaps, and then you see more people being initiated into it. And then there's more appearances, because the more people connect, the more claim that those beings have here. Because interdimensional beings can't just come here. They have to have representation here. They have to have people who they've gone through initiations with. They have to have merged their consciousness with these people. And that's what allows them to be here. So it could be that Crowley brought this through, and it could be that Lam is Crowley in another life. It could be that he's, you know what I mean? Because this is the trans. Many people, if you're not aware, believe that the Greys are part of a regressive transhumanist timeline from the future. And so it could be that he's communicating with an aspect of himself. This could be an aspect to save himself to some degree. It's a very deep wormhole, folks. But
well, no, that's fascinating that you put it that way. And that's a lot deeper than the kind of superficial read of people saying, oh, this just looks like the same thing. This is interesting, though, because when they asked Crowley about it, they said, how did you draw this? And he said, from real life. So he felt that he had seen him and interacted with him. So that is very much like an alien experience, an encounter. It's also interesting that he could be Crowley in the future as one of these eighth sphere android type things.
That's the first thing when I looked at it, and the way that he presented Lam, to me, it felt like he was presenting himself. He would present Lam in very strange ways, like when he wrote the really scathing critique of Blavatsky's work, he put it on the front page.
Right.
And people are like, why did you put Lam there? And it's like, well, he's revealing who he's saying, I wrote this. This is the author of this. And there you have the left hand versus the right hand path. You have the author of the left hand, or you have the person speaking. I mean, if you're channeling something, you're going to want to put an homage to the person that you're channeling. You're going to want to leave something there that indicates that's a key that gives credit to the person who or the essence that helps you bring that through. It's part of the structure of the work. You can't have it unless it's there. If you remove it, won't carry through time.
Right.
So I think it was actually, I'm going to say like that. I'm pretty sure that was probably him. I'm going to go out on a limb.
Oh, that is fascinating. You know, when I think about Lam, like you were saying with Ahriman and the head and the misshapen head, why is the head, we know that Ahriman aims for the head, and Steiner described it very unusually, and we have to take this cosmologically, but also think of it seriously. He said, if Ahriman had his way, he would make away with humanity's head, and its torso would then be left to evolve to Vulcan.
Wow.
Yeah. So he's happy with the head. And so let's think about this. You know, there's a lot of interesting things here, because to circle back to the Ted Williams story and the cryogenic freezing, for some reason, and this got out, they removed the head in that process. It's quite interesting. But then to go cosmologically, Steiner's talking about this, you know, let me sum it up for you, basically, is how he's saying it. Ahriman, he's aimed at humanity's head. This is what he's interested in. So the head for Ahriman is the prize. That is, the mind resides in there, of course. Yeah. But then when you get Lam, and we take a look at Lam, he really and Ahriman, we'll just use Ahriman. It is the head. It's like there's an aspect here where we're just dealing, the rest of it is all undeveloped. Like the Greys, there's nothing going on with the rest of the body that's striking at all. And yet, the head is gigantic and harbors like a super brain. So is this the twist in evolution when you take on the eighth sphere? That's the artificial evolutionary step. And what happens is the head evolves much more based on all this transhumanism, and the body sort of decays and withers and becomes the secondary thing you really don't need.
Oh, 100%. I think that's exactly what goes on, and all of your energy and all of your life force just goes into your head, and that's the result of it. But this is over a very long period of time.
Right.
And the head is also for me, sometimes it's the future, and the lower chakras is the past. So kind of when you're taking the head, you're taking the future, you're taking the potential.
Oh,
because these
crown
are the
chakra.
Yeah.
Third eye.
Mm-hmm.
The next step.
Yeah. So it would make sense. And then it's also coming to mind, there's also those beings that have the very long heads in Caracas.
Yes.
The
The cone heads, as they call them.
And I think, like, when I see those, after thinking about the Greys and stuff, are these beings who have overcome this incredible hardship somehow and
learn to cope?
Yeah, because maybe not everybody turns into like a withered little feathery gray. Maybe people got kind of deep in this and then they overcame it. And there was also maybe there were very advanced initiates that kind of went through this and came out of it, but the head was still there. I'm still playing with these ideas. Whenever I see the elongated, like the big heads, I always think of this process now. So
it's quite unusual. They are quite unusual. If you look at Akhenaten and Nefertiti, as Carmen Bolter has explained to me, funny shaped hat covers funny shaped head. And we have those pharaoh hats, and we can see that Akhenaten's head goes way back and up, just like those Paracas mummies. So you really, it's like a physical type that just existed here for a while, and we don't know what happened to them.
And it may have nothing to do with Lam and that, but it just makes me think isn't that so interesting, that there's that elongation. Yeah.
Gigi, why did the Greys take genetic material from humanity, do all these tests, the Betty and Barney Hill style abduction, scrape the skin, sexual organs, hair, thing? What are they doing?
They're trying to recover what they've lost. They're trying to recover the humanity that they've lost. There was a very interesting remote viewing session of Mars, and it's in the FBI vault. It's on my Twitter account, but it's basically this remote viewer is remote viewing Mars, and he sees this civilization that was incredibly philosophical and incredibly advanced, but they were dying. And so I think sometimes different timelines and and they were very tall, and they had reached a point in their evolution where, again, they'd put too much energy into like philosophy and the mind, and they hadn't developed anything else. And so when that happens, whether it be on Mars or whether it be, with more associated with the eighth sphere, as we're talking about, you have to go back in time and try to recover the DNA that you've lost. Or it's not so much necessarily the DNA, it's the phase of consciousness that is within the DNA.
Right.
So you can't just skip over this. And this is why so many people are we're not against AI. We're not against the advancement of technology. We're against the supplementing technology for human function, basically. But yeah, it's all it's all basically them trying to come back and redo something that they couldn't do.
Wow. Absolutely fascinating. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We're here with Gigi Young. Her channel is on YouTube. Her videos are there. Quite a remarkable video series that you have, Gigi, in plain sight. And now you have Isis Rising. That one we're going to talk about too. You, people can get in touch with you and find your work at gigiyoung.com. And these courses, I've always heard about people taking these courses that you do, and they're the psychic courses, developing your intuition. You have two different levels of those courses, so we should at least take a minute here so you can describe what they are.
Yeah, so I have basically a foundations course for intuition development. That goes over every clair, so every psychic ability, every psychic sense. And then I have a second level that gets into really how to use those and how to work with them. So yeah, you can get pretty far through them, and they're just on my website. And I also have premium where I do live Q&As and little discussions and stuff like that.
Fantastic. Yeah, excellent work. Highly recommended, and definitely make it part of what you look into if you're looking into these subjects, because Gigi Young, her work is remarkable, everyone. I want to tell you just how impressive that body of work is. We're going to take your questions here, and before we jump into them, Miss Olivia, how's it going?
Good. It's great. I just wanted to throw this out here.
Yeah.
Cylindro Andromeda says, Lam is now in the possession of Peter Lavenda. I asked, the original? And he said, yes. He was in a show with a Lam portrait behind him, and he does not think it was replica.
Wow, that's fascinating. Of course, I mean, because Lavenda writes for TTSA.
It's pretty creepy. I
that would
want
bring it around.
Oh, the curtains are coming down. That is so interesting. Whoever said that, thank you so much for sharing that. Although that is very strange. I don't know how I feel about someone that works with the TTSA having an image of a gray and having an image that was used in a Crowley practice. I mean, maybe if somebody is disclosing something, that they should do it without a spiritual affiliation and without that kind of thing, and just disclose it. So
Right, absolutely. Well, next Lou will come out, you know.
that's Lou. Lou also channels Lam.
Hey, that's right. Well, he has 3 letters in his name, just like Lam. L-U-E.
Yeah.
There it is.
I want to know something else about his name.
Yes,
so
please.
David Tormina, who's great at this kind of stuff, he found out Elizondo is a Basque name.
Oh, that's
it's
interesting.
It's a Basque place/name and a surname meaning house beside the church.
Fascinating. Gigi, this is interesting because part of what came out in that episode, I'm going to track this back for a minute. You know, I've done all these interviews with Alexandra Bruce from Forbidden Knowledge TV. And Alexandra knows all these things about the Basque, including that their DNA is very unusual. In their area, they're very specific. Their language is specific. It doesn't make any sense compared to everything else around it. Their appearance is very different from everything else in the Pyrenees, you know. So she's always gone into this on a very deep track. Now, Cayce has said that the Atlanteans that were migrating that way, some of them stopped in the Pyrenees and made those, you know, kind of chalk drawings in the Cayce cliffs. And then, so we have this hint that the Basque are representing the Atlanteans. Ted Williams was a Basque. And so we're cryogenically frozen. We think, well, he's quite a prize there for this type of development. And then, so David Tormina's remark about Lou being a Basque is just interesting from that point of view. So that explains that for everyone. What I wanted to ask you before we get off the grays is, how do they have this remarkable ability in all of the stories to put people under, to make them forget, but it's not a deep enough hypnosis that they'll forget forever? What is that? What are they doing to our brains when we get abducted by a gray? These people, we've heard so many cases.
Yes, they don't really have an ability to affect the heart or the emotion like an angelic entity does. They'll make you feel something. It's very cold, and they can really use the mind. So they really have developed their mind. I mean, truly, they've developed their mind. They've really focused their will, and it's very powerful. I mean, they don't have the emotional stuff down. They've definitely lost some stuff, but they're extremely powerful with telekinesis. And they have extremely honed mental influence and like telepathy and just that will. And so they'll use technology, but they'll also use that. So it's kind of a mixture of that, I think.
Wow. Yeah. It's absolutely incredible, the superiority of their mental abilities over us. I mean, to the ability where they'll make us see things. That's remarkable. They have this crazy mix of incredible technology, to do things with. Incredibly, the things that we've seen through abductions and stuff suggests a really superior technology. There's no doubt about it. But then also, the mind. It's as though all of their life force, psychic energy was just in the mind. And that can just go right into you because it's resonance, right? So it just goes right into your mind. And unless to really get control of that situation, you have to develop the other aspects of yourself, your emotion, the heart, and the physical body. And then you can overcome that. But if you're just trapped in that same stream, you're going to be really susceptible to it. So. Wow, absolutely. Miss Olivia, we'll take your questions. You've been very patient.
You're all set? I got so many questions.
Well, we'll do our best. We'll do our best.
The last time we had so many questions. Okay, so I'm going to start with this one. Truth Flower. We are being forced into a ritualistic initiation. How to protect oneself?
Yeah.
How to protect yourself?
Well, let's talk about this ritualistic initiation that we're all going through.
There's so many ways to look at it. I mean, a lot of people have talked about masks as an element of ritual, and that's absolutely true. We started out the show talking about putting people in a hypnotic induction through confusing them, through telling them wear a mask, don't wear a mask. You can get COVID through contact surfaces. You can't get COVID through contact surfaces. All of that creates a trance. That's part of a ritual, is to create a specific level of focus, of relaxed focus. And there's a higher level to the ritual too, which is, are we going to choose sovereignty, or are we going to choose no sovereignty? Are we going to just be moving towards being cogs in a wheel and losing that sovereignty? That's really and that is know thyself. Are we going to do the work of knowing thyself and go through that process, or are we not? That's really what it's about. And there's all sorts of bizarre ritualistic elements that happen every day. I can't even, like, I've got notes for my In Plain Sight series I haven't even gotten to because there's so much ritualistic stuff that's around this topic.
Yes.
So.
Well, you did a number of videos about the lockdown and all the different things. It was quite impressive while it was happening. And the mask part is interesting because certainly putting on a mask is in ritual, certainly. That's a very deep aspect. But it also shuts off the humanity. You can't see the expression, and your breathing changes.
Oh, yeah. And there's also this thing that I haven't heard anyone mention. I actually had a video planned for it, but I've been moving and everything. I haven't gotten it out yet. So I'll just say it here. But masks are also part of possession. Masks are an integral part of possession. If you go back to the very shamanistic days, what would happen is you would see a shaman and they would use masks. The reason why they were using a mask was to remove their personality remove their face, and to put on another face. And then they would go through their ritual and they would channel whatever spirit with the mask on. They were a different person with the mask on. So masks are actually a part of possession. You remove the personality, that's gone. And this is something that's deep in our being. This is something that has been going on in rituals for a very long time. And that's why you'll see a lot of these, you'll see a lot in Africa and South America, these masks. What are these for? And it was because they would do these rituals, they would remove their personality and put on the personality of something else. Now, this is where it gets hairy, is that if they have enchanted this imagery, which perhaps they have, if you look at the Denver airport, you can see this use of masks. If you look at Madonna's video, you can kind of see, not the exact ones, but if they start to seed our mind with certain ideas about this particular mask and masking, and then you do it, it could lead to some type of ritualistic possessing, right?
Interesting. So you're embodying, yes, absolutely.
Because the removal of yourself, it's the removal of your identity and who you are. So,
right. And we've already seen that the people involved, even Fauci said, take off your silly mask originally. They know that the mask is completely useless in the situation that they've created. But it became the most important thing for them, and they've driven it as a wedge in society and have people shooting each other over nonsense. This is interesting, though, because when you take on that identity, that's kind of total. That's more than wearing a star armband, even.
It is more. It is more because the head is important. They know that the head is important. The head contains everything. So, I mean, that's why it's important that the head is the sum total of, even face reading knows that. I mean, the Chinese and many other cultures believe you can tell an entire person by their head, by their face and stuff. So it's a very big deal esoterically. Yeah.
There's I want to mention this now because RFK Jr., who we had on the program over the summer, he is doing a large protest. He's part of the protest tomorrow in Berlin, and they're supposed to have 2 million people for this protest. And I did retweet his video in the Dark Journalist Twitter feed. It's there. And he's there. He's ready. Now, the last time a Kennedy was there with that kind of an audience was when John F. Kennedy gave his speech there. And that speech was to reassure those people that on the other side of that wall, with all those armaments ready to take over and stuff, that America still stood with the people of West Berlin. And what's important about that is Berlin has this quality. It's like the conjuring of heroism against incredible odds. And so when we're looking at that and we see Kennedy there protesting this is the moment in history. There's some kind of a reckoning happening here, Gigi.
Yeah, it's almost a ceremonial thing, isn't it? And I mean, I think it's also very fitting. I don't know if this is what he was thinking or anything like that. It just occurs to me. But, there's also, especially in the conspiracy, I'm not going to tiptoe around it. There's an issue with Project Paperclip people coming to to work in NASA and work in our government. So it's a very interesting choice for this kind of thing.
Yeah, it's sort of setting it back.
It does feel that way. Yeah.
Putting it right into balance.
Yeah, that's what it. Yeah, considering.
Here's kind of ground zero for it.
Yeah.
This is going to be extraordinary. I'm looking forward to this because the wave coming out of that is extraordinary, and it's so interesting. Some of the things that he was telling me in relation to what we've been witnessing, it's quite fascinating because of the amount of studies that he cited. about doctors who had pointed out various things about this and various drugs and how they had all been shut down over and over again. And how he regarded Gates and Fauci as, really like Lex Luthor. He was
Yes.
dead serious about it. So he understands the situation very, very well.
Wow, I love that analogy. Yeah.
Okay, Miss Olivia.
Before we move on from the masks, Maui Mixer says, talk about the childhood trauma we are creating now. Unmask the children. And Brian Parker says, the mask being a symbol of a ritual, what ends a ritual? I think I know what he's alluding to, but what do you say?
Gigi, how do you end the ritual?
The first part of ending the ritual is realizing that you're participating in a ritual. I think that, there's a lot of people that are not participating in this ritual. And I think it's important to be clear about that. There's a lot of people that are observing this ritual, and many of those people are in your audience today.
Right.
They're observing it, and they're doing these things because they have to, but the ritual isn't taking over their consciousness in the same way that it perhaps is other people. And I think it's important to recognize that a ritualistic initiation element, or all of these things, can be introduced to the public rituals and things like that. But it doesn't mean that everybody is equally falling prey to them. In fact, some people can use that energy to accelerate their life even, and overcome things. And, there's ways to do that. But the first part is waking up and seeing it and realizing it, in a sense, like in the Matrix, when you wake up and you see it all going on. And if you can wake up, if you can just do that, that's everything. Because once you can do that, we are at a time, especially now, where you can find the right people and the right information to start piecing it together and start healing and understanding it. But the first thing is becoming lucid.
Wow, fascinating. I want to say to our friends in Australia also, we've been reading all the stories about the incredible police powers being used on Australian citizens. And you guys, for some reason, are the bullseye in this war. But we definitely are aware of you, and we hear the stories, and it doesn't sit well, and it won't stand. So just to let you know, Miss Olivia.
Okay, Ed Kaufman. Do the global elite now have a select group like the Nine that are performing CE5 occult rituals? Can these deep state occultists perform rituals that can, quote, materialize ET beings?
Yeah, I'll tell you, this is really right up Gigi's alley. This is the one. I want to mention Hal Putoff there, though, because all
the characters are in the show tonight.
It's inescapable that this guy, actively cultivated this remote viewing aspect. He cultivated a whole psychic program. So it follows very closely that, he who helped set up TTSA, this is, the group that Paharich set up with the Nine originally. He wound up recruiting Uri Geller, and Uri Geller was picked up by Hal Putoff. So the lineage directly from the Nine goes right through to TTSA.
Wow.
But Gigi, this is interesting to me because them working with an off-world intelligence, an AI intelligence, or an interdimensional intelligence, there's something in there. They have these contacts going on.
Oh, absolutely. I think the ultimate goal would be to manifest them here. I mean, I don't think that they're just sharing secrets together. I think it is to manifest eventually them here, because I think that what ends up happening with a lot of these beings that do fall prey to the eighth sphere is, again, it's an artificial sphere. And because it's not natural, there is no evolution for it. Eventually you just wake up and you have no body and you're just a head and you can't die.
Right.
That's sort of the kind of thing we're looking at. And so what would you do is you would try to use whatever psychic powers you developed, your mentalism, and you would try to reach through time to perhaps come back, truly come back to where you fell from. Because this is a fall. It's another fall. The eighth sphere is another fall, another deeper fall into density. And so another loss of language in a way. And so they're coming back to get that. And I think ultimately it is to manifest here in more and more material ways and more influential ways. And I think that there's been people who have made a very good argument that AI is doing that, and that is the goal. People have made decent arguments with 5G, the space fence, things like this, that if you start to look at it through an occult eye, which we are long overdue, I think you could easily make the argument that person who asked the question is saying is, are these people going to manifest? And I would say, yes. I would say that that is the whole point, is that they can't evolve in the eighth sphere anymore. Eventually, it's artificial. You have to come back to what you are, which is God. So Absolutely, they want to manifest. They want to be here.
Wow. No question about it. Miss Olivia.
Gigi, we have a few people who'd like you, if you'd like to share, go into your own initiation process that you've experienced.
Yeah, there's so many ways that I could go into this. I talk about it a bit in Isis Rising. My first real initiation happened when I was probably in my late teens, early 20s with some Pleiadians that basically came to me. And it was very shocking. But they introduced I always had a choice. I could have always said no. And I went through many periods during that one overall initiation with that I worked very closely with these Pleiadian beings, where I could have opted out at any point, right? There was nothing forced like what we're talking about here. And I did that for about a decade. And that was the feminine aspect of my consciousness developing, because that level is very associated with Venus and the feminine mysteries. And then once I turned 33, I began another initiation process, which was going into more of the sun or the masculine elements, which is different for a woman to be in the masculine level of mysteries, or the masculine experiencing that, than it is for a man. So that was my initiation process, roughly.
What are the Pleiadians, when you've seen Pleiadians, how would you describe them?
They are, when I saw them, it was actually quite cliche. They just look like human beings. They looked Nordic. I saw myself. It was just I just recognized it as myself in another time. So it looked like me, except for my hair was a lot lighter than it is now. And there was a male with a beard, and he was like the leader. He was I recognized him as like a father figure, like a leader. And then I was on a ship again, and there were sort of other people. There were other people, but we all sort of looked very similar. It's actually very cliche. I wish I could share something different, but it actually is very similar to
that kind of angelic appearance.
It is. It really is. I wish I'm trying to. The thing that I would say is striking is that they have like this beautiful golden energy, or like this beautiful loving energy, where it just goes into your, it just relaxes your nervous system, and they never want to take any. It's hard to say, but there's a really beautiful energy, like a velvety energy about it. At least it was my experience.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, incredible.
Well, I'm going to bring up Christ on that. So when I have prayed to Christ, that is exactly how I experience him. Is this velvety, like everything in my body relaxes when and that's how I know I'm in connection or in communion with him, because I feel incredibly safe and absolutely loved. And that's just not a feeling I get any other time. Would you say that he's Pleiadian?
I would say that he's like a Venusian. I honestly would. I'll go I'll inch out on that limb. I absolutely, I would. I think that it explains a lot. I mean, if you look at the Essenes, and the way they functioned, it was very different to a lot of people that were around.
Oh yeah.
And when I was researching the Essenes, something struck me. This is when I made the Christ Pleiadian Venusian, well, mainly, Pleiadian connection, was that the Venus body, or the body immortal, or there's an energy body that can be created, and it represents a higher society. So when you achieve this higher body, it represents a fifth dimensional earth, or a higher society, or like a Christed society. And in that society, you always give what you have first. So everything you have, you just give. And everybody just contributes in that way. You just offer everything you have. And what it allows is like this higher collective society to form, where no one really goes without. And it allows a super high consciousness to form, where you're almost acting in this beautiful unison, because you're all living from service. And that's what I remember from these higher worlds, is that you can't live with that energy body in this world. You would literally probably just you'd be like Edgar Cayce, where he just burnt out. You can't live with that energy. You can't live in that state in this world, because you would just have its way with you.
Fascinating. Wow.
But that was the same way that the Essenes functioned. That's why I mentioned it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Cayce talked about, it's very interesting because he mentioned attunement and service, and how those are the two pieces, and that, what we see though very often is the attunement part.
Yes.
And the servant part is sort of on the back burner. But it seems like without the service fulfilling it, the attunement part never reaches its full flower.
Well, you don't get the synchronicity.
Right.
So when you realize your purpose, and you have the courage to do what you love and pursue it relentlessly, no matter how much it challenges you, if you do it and you're of service and you stick to it, you will come across incredible synchronicity. And that's what really gets these high societies running, is they run on incredible synchronicity, and higher beings can come down and communicate, because it just gets the spin going, where it's so fast. And it has to do with service, following your heart, doing it no matter what, and giving it to the world. That's it. And that's kind of how the Essenes functioned.
Wow, incredible. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We're here with Gigi Young. It's X Series 95. We've gone really deep on these sort of space rituals, initiation, and we're taking your questions. We're going to take a couple more questions, and I want to remind everyone to go to gigiyoung.com to check out her work, and also to look in YouTube for incredible video series. The Isis Rising series is the newer one, but the Occult in Plain Sight series, that you've been doing that one, and that is remarkable.
Yeah, the In Plain Sight is more timely than I thought it was going to be. And they'll say that. And then the Isis Rising is newer, but it's sort of like the more Pleiadian Venusian style mysteries that
It's more esoteric, straight up.
It is. It's very esoteric.
Miss Olivia, a couple more questions.
Tomalch O'Feargal says, brought up that often quoted, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against spiritual wickedness.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, there's no question about that.
So a lot of people, they don't know where to put their energies right now and how to fight.
Oh, this is interesting because I had a conversation with Catherine Austin Fitz. She's been talking to me about spiritual warfare for years. And it's interesting because it blends in with the political battle that we're involved in. But that's kind of where that guy's question goes.
Mhm.
Gigi, spiritual warfare that we're engaging in, how do you do it?
Well, first of all, it's not going to be easy. Even on your best days, you're going to have moments where you feel like, what the heck is going on? And so there's a part of it where one of the things that my guide said to me about psychic attacks, because I think that this is kind of like one big psychic attack on humanity, is that when you're being psychically attacked, or there's psychic attacks, or this negative energy around, there's an element where you have to know when to ride it out, and to just be like, okay, this is a very dark cycle. There's a lot of chaos. There's a lot of stuff. I'm just going to remove myself from this, and I'm going to do something that nourishes me, that nurtures me. I'm going to go into nature. I'm going to do an activity that I love. I'm going to talk to someone that I adore. And where you remove yourself, because sometimes you do have to ride out the storm. There's nothing that you can do. There is no action. There is no thinking. You just have to get through it. But then there's also times where you can make moves, where you can speak out, where you can share your thoughts. And I think it's going inward to the point where you know when to retreat and build your energy up and to ride things out. And when you know that you have to speak up. And that is through just connecting with yourself and trusting your intuition, because you can't just check out the whole time, and you can't just be aggressively yelling at people, on the internet either, thinking that it makes a difference. It's about precision. When times like this happen, it's really about precision. It teaches us precision. When do we rest and when do we fight? And that's what I think we can take
Precision away. Strike. I like it. Miss Olivia.
Hold on, okay. So this is big. Nicole Hernandez. Gigi, can you speak on the future of the collective energies for the rest of 2020? And Spasmabot wants to know, what does Gigi mean, quote, while we're still able to choose?
No. Yeah. Okay. So the rest of 2020, you know what? I actually was talking to Daniel about this. I actually did a tarot reading. I never do that really. I actually did this tarot reading for 2020. And I actually feel like most of the chaos and stuff is going to happen after the election. Like, I really see things getting a lot more chaotic, and kind of falling apart after the election. Because usually people talk about it being like before the election, there's all the October surprise, there's all this chaos and all this battling back and forth. But I actually feel like it's after the election that we're going to see the most chaos, because people have invested so much mental energy saying it's just until the election. Once the election happens, then I can take off the mask. Then I can, we can resume normalcy. And I think that people are having this mindset. And I think the reality is that this election is going to, go on for a lot longer than we thought it was going to go for. And it's actually going to get a lot messier after. And then that's going to obviously extrapolate into the rest of the year. It's going to get interesting, though. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, are they going to try to obscure the election results by creating chaos?
That's what I think. I really feel like that's what I think. I think that, and not even just from like a psychic evaluation, just from an analysis. Mm-hmm. I think that this time, that this next 4 years legitimately, and they've been saying this, is so important, because they have to reveal their cards that they're going to dispute no matter who. I mean, I think that's what we're going to be looking at, because there's nothing to lose. And that nothing to lose energy, or that nothing to lose mindset, it's very intense to see these two deep state factions battling and then getting to the point where they're like, we have nothing to lose. So that's the kind of thing that I see.
Is Joe Biden a remote control robot? This is the real question.
I mean, I just pinch myself that
Wow.
this is occurring. I mean,
Amazing. It is amazing. Miss Olivia, we'll take 2 more questions.
David Donaway, what is the most important choice in this window of choice?
the most, I would say, in this window of choice, I would say I think maybe the most important choice is realizing that you have a choice, is realizing that you can take control, is realizing that you matter and that you don't have to go along with, individuals that really are trying to terrify you to death to control you. I think we have to really come to a point where we realize our value and our power, and we can use this time of initiation to project ourselves into a higher society. And that's ultimately what this is about. We will move there, as we were talking about today, but we can move there kicking and screaming and making every mistake, or we can walk there with a bit more grace through awareness. We get that grace through awareness and responsibility, personal responsibility, sovereignty. That's how we walk into the golden age with grace and not arrive at the golden age with a society that's basically destroyed, right? So we'll get there either way, but how we get there is going to be, can we come into our heart? I was talking to Olivia today about empathy. Can we develop that empathy? And these are things that we have to think of.
That is fascinating. We're going to get there regardless of if they come along with us.
That's the reality. Well, the eighth sphere will eventually gobble up all and just spin off. And just kidding.
Wow, it's true. Don't make us get into the bitter moon.
Don't.
One more, Miss Olivia.
Okay, I'm going to combine these two. So David Donaway again. Are some now building an arc for a humanist option to the future? And Ed Kaufman says, is this the esoteric meaning of Jesus's words, where 2 or more are gathered? I'm wondering, a lot of us are feeling, obviously with masks and social distancing and everything, very isolated from one another.
Well, they've tried to lock down churches. That tells you a lot.
But what we need more than ever is connection and coherence and a plan, and to get organized. How do we do that? A lot of people are talking about buying land and creating tiny home villages, this sort of thing. It's happening as soon as people are planning for when things open up again.
I thought you said buying lamb for a second. Not buy lamb. This is interesting, and I think it's happening. It is already happening. First of all, I've looked at stats on this. People are shifting out of the cities already. People are leaving places that are controlled by these insane governors, like Gavin Newsom in California, and Cuomo, and Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan. And not everybody can do that, but it is, for those who can, they are. We're already seeing this. So the great move is on, Gigi, somehow.
It's beginning. The bifurcation, is beginning, and I think it's important that everybody observe where the freedom-based strongholds are. Where are the areas in the country that are honoring sovereignty and that are sticking to what this country was founded on, which is freedom, and kind of, I think we have to observe where those places are. And what was the second part of the question?
I guess where spirituality comes in, and calling in the spiritual forces together.
The gathering.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That is interesting, because it's in one of these kind of Sermon on the Mount pieces from Jesus, and he says, where 2 or more are gathered in my name. This is interesting because, of course, he wants you to pray alone, but something about 2 or more together.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, there's that incredible power of the collective. And I don't know, you'll probably know who said it, but it's about the third force. When people gather, this third force forms.
Right.
And the third force is incredibly important because that third force is the higher dimensional force, the spiritual force, and it actually creates and influences the material world.
Yes.
So what you're basically doing when you gather together is that you're creating this collective, this vision, maybe even this very elaborate. The more people that you have under that, under love and under that high energy, the more power it generates, because you've got this giant collective force, this giant third force that's forming, that can become the future if developed enough and if visited enough. It's like a tulpa. It's like a positive tulpa. And this is actually also what's missing in today, is that people are not having their own vision. So they're not actually sitting down and thinking, well, what society would I like to live in? You know, what changes would I genuinely like to see? What world do I want to live in? And really getting specific about it. Because when you gather around these specific dreams and these specific visions, they do take on a personality. And I believe that that's kind of getting into New Jupiter and the higher spheres. What you're doing is you're calling that higher sphere to us, because we're already kind of existing there as well too. So we're holding that harmonic, and we're bringing that higher sphere to us, that higher consciousness to us, because we're building this collective consciousness right now in the ether that's pulling it here. But it involves having your own vision, and it involves gathering. And that's what they're removing. They're removing the gatherings, but they're also manipulating people by making them so emotional and so triggered in their wounds that they don't form their own vision. They just automatically default to oppose whatever they hate the most. And there's a difference in just having a belief because following one person because you hate that person, the other person, and genuinely having a vision about the future. There, right. So.
Wow, fascinating.
Gigi, would you consider hosting a group meditation or a vision?
Oh yeah, well we'll talk to her offline about that.
Okay.
I don't want to put her on the spot.
Totally.
That is absolutely fascinating idea. I can see it already.
Just float in.
We'll wrap up on this. You've been bringing a lot of these spiritual concepts in since over the past decade at least, and one of the things you've been pointing out for people is that you have to get familiar with yourself and your own spirituality, and that you can't sort of throw it over to gurus and things like that. In a period like this, people are surrendering a lot of authority in all kinds of different ways. So you're a great one for sovereign spirituality. This is something that this is a term that you quoted. How do you play out this sovereign spirituality in a situation like this?
Well, it's the most important. It's the most important thing. I mean, just from an esoteric standpoint, it gets to a point in your human process where your ascension process or your rising is completely unique to you. And I talk about this in my Isis Rising video, in my Isis Rising series, where we actually retrace our lives. And we retrace the themes that we experienced in these lives. And we retrace exact cosmic pathways that exist within stars and combinations of planets. And your relationship with every star and every planet and every celestial body is only yours. A teacher or a guru, even the best that you could possibly have, can only initiate you into a certain echelon of time and space and energy where all those things exist, an overall frequency. But they can never reveal to you who you are. They can never show you the exact combinations of planets and stars that you are in your relationship. That's only in your memory. That's only within you. And so it gets to this point, and we were talking about this with initiation earlier, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 is the will. That's sovereignty. You have no will unless you're sovereign. And what this means is that when you begin to rise and when you begin to remember who you are and get to that higher phase of initiation, you need your sovereignty to ascend. You need your sovereignty to rise, because that's the only way you're going to know and remember and have access to your unique star patterns. No one has that in common with you. No one has the exact incarnational pathway, the exact incarnations through time with the exact meaning. The planets are storing all the exact position of the planets. That's why the Mayans were so obsessed with every day being a Baktun and having certain force. They're trying to remember this. They're trying to name people through that and track that. But it's a long story, but your sovereignty is so important because you need that to regain who you are on every level of your being. Because eventually there's not going to be anyone who can do anything for you. It's just you and your abilities. And that's that. And you need your sovereignty. And the process of developing sovereignty gets you to the point where you can handle that, though. It's not like you just arrive there and it's panic time. The level 1 and 2 allow you to get to that point where you can know what you're doing.
Fantastic.
Can I throw in a wacky question at the end?
Sure.
Okay, Silver Fox says, please ask Gigi if she has ever spoken with herself in another dimension or timeline.
Oh, hey.
Kind of a cool question.
Well, you saw yourself blonde.
Yeah, hey. Yes, I have.
Most of us.
Yes, I actually have. There are differences. The core energy was the same, but obviously I was significantly less advanced. No, I absolutely have. And I actually kind of think that that's almost what psychic ability is this really elaborate mathematical process of remembering and connecting with yourself in different times. And then I'll just leave it there. But part of your psychic process and part of your psychic awakening is absolutely almost communicating with yourself.
Are you saying that you saw opposite universe evil, Gigi?
No. No, actually, no, I have. I feel like, wow, that's just taking me to places.
What was it, Bewitched, when she had the
Serena, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Where she had dark hair.
Oh my gosh,
no good.
It's my evil witch, Serena.
Could very well be. Gigi, amazing, unbelievable information. And of course, I'll direct everyone to gigiyoung.com. And I spend a lot of time watching your stuff. You really, the other thing that's great is that you're able to balance that world and this one so well. And the information is so valuable. But tonight, really unbelievable.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
It's great to see you.
Yeah. I always love to be here. I always love connecting with everyone in the audience, and we have such great conversations. So it's my absolute pleasure.
Wow, we can't wait. And we're going to have you back in September. So get ready for that now that you're situated and your guns blazing.
Maybe it'll be Serena.
I'm thinking the way the election stuff's going, we might need you weekly.
Sounds good.
Hey, it's great to see you. Miss Olivia?
I just want to say everyone agreed that this is Gigi's best show ever. Just loved it.
I know.
Thank you. I've been taking some time off, so.
Yes. Well, and that's
You're very focused, very refreshed.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
All right, so I have some super chatters to thank. Eurythmia's Fun, Michael Scordato, Yasmin Lopez, Joseph Babry, D Falcon 61, Kimberly K, Irie A, Occult Fan, Doyle Wayne, 70s Libra Girl, Jordan Romeau, John Dye, and Medley Childress. Thank you so much. And I also wanted to wish a happy birthday to Maggie Smith. It's her birthday today.
Fantastic.
And tomorrow it is JJ's birthday.
Yes.
Brenda Blanc.
Yes.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday. Incredible. Let's thrill everyone, Gigi, and shout out a few people that are in the chat. Can you see the chat?
I will have to. I don't have the chat open.
Oh, that's okay. I'll do it for you. Let's just do a couple quick ones here at the end. And Nena says, it's great to have you here. Breach, of course, fantastic. The Occult fan, we already called him out. Daniel Natal, unbelievable. The man, the myth. Lee, he's out there. We know him. Rogue Faction. Kontiki Man. No one you know. I like that. That's a good one. That's sort of clever. Brenda Fisher. Irie A. Kimber. Scratch. Flying Memorials. Tricky Vicky. Fantastic. I saw Kate out there earlier. Carly was out there.
Yes, she was.
Dimensions and Beyond. Incredible. Bruce. Fantastic. Sir, we have much to talk about. Bruce Ross Morgan, who's in the documentary on the UFO file that we just put out, and an incredible section, by the way, there. Highly recommend it. Radiant Creators, great to see you out there. Scarlet Fire. We will see you all next week, and it's been fantastic having Gigi here. And Gigi, we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much. Good night, guys.
Yeah, good night. Thank you, Gigi.
And good night, Miss Olivia. Nicely done.
Thank
And
you.
it was a great idea about the meditation. We definitely are going to talk to her about that.
Well, the crowd is really ready for it. They want to join in.
Fantastic. I think it's a fantastic idea. And when you kind of get, Gigi can really generate that energy. And she's great with collective meditation. So that could be something else.
There's a need, right? There's a need for it.
Absolutely. Fantastic questions.
Okay, thank
Round
you.
of applause for Miss Olivia.
Thank you so
Unbelievable. We will see you all next week. This is a great, I can't believe Gigi just was able to reach out and go so deep on all these different subjects. But we're going to have a very exciting episode for you next week. Have a great weekend. And we really appreciate everyone joining us. The X series will be back next week, like I said, and we might have a special surprise coming up for you as well in terms of our interview guests. We will see you next week.
Have a beautiful week.
Sounds good to me. And broadcast, as they say. I am a DJ. I am what I play.